The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
We're reading today from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shearer here on the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from the foreword by Shearer. He writes, "Though I lived and worked in the Third Reich during the first half of its brief life, watching at first hand Adolf Hitler consolidate his power as dictator of a great but baffling nation and then lead it off to war and conquest, this personal experience would not have led me to attempt to write this book had there not occurred at the end of World War II an event unique in history. This was the capture of most of the confidential archives of the German government and all its branches, including those of the Foreign Office, the Army and Navy, the National Socialist Party, and Heinrich Himmler's secret police. Never before, I believe, has such a vast treasure fallen into the hands of contemporary historians. Hitherto, the archives of a great state, even when it was defeated in war and its government overthrown by revolution, as happened to Germany and Russia in 1918, were preserved by it, and only those documents which served the interests of the subsequent ruling regime were ultimately published. The swift collapse of the Third Reich in the spring of 1945, however, resulted in the surrender not only of a vast bulk of its secret papers, but of other priceless materials, such as private diaries, highly secret speeches, conference reports, and correspondence, and even transcripts of telephone conversations of the Nazi leaders tapped by a special office set up by Hermann Goering in the Air Ministry. General Franz Halder, for example, kept a voluminous diary jotted down in Gabelsberger shorthand, not only from day to day, but from hour to hour throughout the day. It's a unique source of concise information for the period between August 14, 1939 and September 24, 1942, when he was chief of the Army staff and in daily contact with Hitler and the other leaders of Nazi Germany. It is the most revealing of the German diaries, but there are others of great value, including those of Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda and close party associate of Hitler, and of General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations of the High Command of the Armed Forces. That's the OKW. There are diaries of the OKW itself and of the Naval High Command. Indeed, the 60,000 files of the German Naval Archives, which were captured at Schloss Tambach near Coburg, contain practically all of the signals, ship's logs, diaries, memoranda, etc. of the German Navy from April 1945, when they were found, all the way back to 1868, when the modern German Navy was founded. The 485 tons of records of the German Foreign Office captured by the U.S. First Army in various castles and mines in the Harz Mountains, just as they were about to be burned on orders from Berlin, cover not only the period of the Third Reich, but go back to the Weimar Republic, to the beginning of the Second Reich of Bismarck. For many years after the war, tons of Nazi documents lay sealed in a large U.S. Army warehouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Our government showing no interest in even opening the packing cases to see what historical interest, documents of historical interest might lie within them. Finally, in 1955, 10 years after their capture, thanks to the initiative of the American Historical Association and the generosity of a couple of private foundations, the Alexandria papers were opened, and a pitifully small group of scholars with an inadequate staff and equipment went to work to sift through them and photograph them before the government, which is in a great hurry in this matter, returned them to Germany. They proved a rich find. So did such documents as the partial stenographic record of 51 Führer conferences on the daily military situation as seen and discussed in Hitler's headquarters, and the fuller text of the Nazi warlord's table talk with his old party cronies and secretaries during the war. The first of these was rescued from the charred remains of some of Hitler's papers at Berchtesgaden by an intelligence officer of the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, and the second was found among Martin Bormann's papers. And he goes through and he lists some more of the stuff. And he says, I have not read, of course, all of the staggering amount of documentation. It would be far beyond the power of any single individual. But I've worked my way through a considerable part of it, slowed down, as all toilers in this rich vineyard must be, by the lack of any suitable indexes. It is quite remarkable how little those of us who were stationed in Germany during the Nazi time, journalists and diplomats, really knew of what was going on behind the facade of the Third Reich. A totalitarian dictatorship, by its very nature, works in great secrecy and knows how to preserve that secrecy from the prying eyes of outsiders. It was easy enough to record and describe the bare, exciting, and often revolting events in the Third Reich. An Anschluss with Austria, the surrender of Chamberlain at Munich, the occupation of Czechoslovakia, the attacks on Poland, Scandinavia, the West, the Balkans, and Russia, the horrors of the Nazi occupation and the concentration camps, and the liquidation of the Jews. But the fateful decisions secretly made, the intrigues, the treachery, the motives, and the aberrations which led up to them, the parts played by the principal actors behind the scenes, the extent of the terror they exercised, and their technique of organizing it. All this and much more remained largely hidden from us until the secret German papers turned up. Some may think that it is much too early to try to write a history of the Third Reich, that such a task should be left to a later generation of writers to whom time has given perspective. I found this view especially prevalent in France when I went to do some research there. Nothing more recent than the Napoleonic era, I was told, should be tackled by writers of history. And then he goes on to kind of push back on that view. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting on commercial radio stations from coast to coast, on Sirius XM all across the North American continent, on Pacifica stations all across America, Europe, and Africa, on American Forces Radio and every U.S. military base in the world, on your electronic device via TuneIn, Progressive Voices, the Thom Hartmann app, simulcast as television, on the Free Speech TV network, on Dish Network, DirecTV, and cable systems all across the country. So pleased to have you with us. Joshua Green is on the line with us. He's the author of a brand new book, Devil's Bargain, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. Joshua Green, also the website Bloomberg.com/Businessweek. He writes, he's a senior national correspondent with Bloomberg Businessweek, previously the senior editor with The Atlantic and the Boston Globe, Washington Monthly, New Yorker, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and others. You can tweet him at Joshua Green, Green. Joshua, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you.
Great to have you with us. So your book, the stories in your book and about your book are starting to leak out, like Donald Trump saying to Paul Manafort, "You think I'm a baby?" This came out of your book, right?
Yes.
So what is the essential message of Devil's Bargain? What did you learn when you were writing this book that you thought, holy cow, I got to tell this to people?
Yeah, no, the message absolutely, and everybody should know that you want to understand what happened, how Trump won this election that nobody saw coming, certainly not me. you have to understand the relationship between Bannon and Trump, because for all, even after all the attention it's gotten, it is such a weird and strange backstory. And so I try and tell that story of how they came together, how they met, and then take you inside the campaign, inside the room, to show how it unfolded in Trump Tower on election night, because I think that is the best way to kind of get the full accounting of what really happened.
Bannon is sometimes referred to as Svengali. Svengali was the bad guy in a 1898 novel, Trilby, by Georges du Maurier. And, he hypnotized this young woman and took advantage of her for years and years. Wouldn't a better analogy be Rasputin? Who, was...
I think it would be, yeah. The Trump, Bannon is a guy whispering in Trump's ear, and I think a lot of people don't know that, Bannon isn't a guy who suddenly came on the scene in August of 2016 when he took over the campaign. He has known Trump and been whispering in his ear about politics since 2010, when they first met at Trump Tower, when Bannon was this conservative filmmaker, a Breitbart news guy, and I don't think that Bannon thought that Trump was going to run for president then, but Bannon, being slightly crazed and a fun-loving kind of guy, thought it was a lark to go up to Trump Tower and talk to Trump. But the two of them really connected. They have a lot of similarities. They both went to military schools. They were both business guys, deal makers. They both had a background in the entertainment industry. And they both had a lot of anger and a chip on their shoulder. And I think that kind of forged the connection and made Trump willing to listen and to embrace Bannon's hard-right populist politics, especially the issue of immigration, which is what I think Bannon really brought to Trump.
So, and he brought immigration not in a what's best for the economy or what's best for the nation, but rather oh my God, the brown people are coming away, didn't he?
He brought a virulently anti-immigrant sentiment, both anti-undocumented immigrant and anti-legal immigrant. And I think Bannon, he'd produced a film in 2006 called Border Wars, where he was down on the U.S.-Mexico border. I think Bannon understood the visceral political power that the issue of illegal immigration has with a lot of conservatives, and I think he saw that viewpoint wasn't really being represented in the mainstream Republican establishment, and he coached Trump to go right after, demonize, really, anybody with brown skin who was trying to get into the United States. And of course, Trump, from the very get-go, when he came down the elevator in Trump Tower, what was the first thing he said in his rambling election speech? He called Mexicans rapists and drug dealers. That was pure, uncut Steve Bannon.
So, what should we learn from this? I mean, to what extent has Trump completely absorbed this, and what does it mean for the future of our republic? What does it mean for the future of policy?
Well, I think for the future of policy under Trump, it's very disconcerting, because unlike the health care bill, Steve Bannon and Donald Trump can have, and already having, a profound effect on how our immigration laws are enforced. They can do that without having to pass legislation through Congress as they do to unwind the Affordable Care Act.
Right, and they're doing this right across the regulatory board, by the way. From the Interior Department to FDA.
Exactly. I don't think it's happening anywhere with more force than it is on immigration. Because Bannon told me during the transition, he said, "You watch, I'm going to employ the shock and awe strategy, and the very first thing we're going to do is go after immigration laws, immigration enforcement." He famously had the executive order banning immigrants from 7 Muslim-majority nations that was held up by the courts, but caused these nationwide protests. Bannon told me that was intentional. I wanted people out there getting angry because I think that Americans really don't welcome immigrants, really don't want these people here. And if they see Donald Trump carrying out his promises to deport, to crack down, all these sorts of things, then they are going to understand that we in the Trump administration are carrying out our promises. And so these protests far from being a bad thing, or really a good thing, because people notice them and they see that Trump is doing what he says. That's kind of a chilling thought.
How is that different from Goebbels sitting down with Hitler and saying, we really need to go after the Jews, the gypsies, the communists, and the trade unionists?
Well, I think because Bannon isn't talking about exterminating anyone. It's just...
Well, I'm talking about in the early 30s, when it was just, let's just demonize these people.
Well,
for political gain.
Definitely an element of demonization, and your analogy to the 1930s is an apt one, because part of what I do in this book is to go really deep into the intellectual underpinnings of what it is that Bannon exactly believes, and where this idea of nationalism comes from. And I asked him in the course of reporting from the book, I said, you claim, you say you're not an anti-Semite, you're not a white nationalist, and yet you name-check these fascist racial theorists, people like Julius Evola, who was Mussolini's chief racial theorist in the 1930s. There was a famous videotape of Bannon, and I think it was in 2014 at a Vatican conference, talking about Evola's ideas. I said, well, how is it that you're familiar with these people if you don't share their views? And he said, well, I'm a nationalist, and when I went looking for an intellectual underpinning, the most important nationalist thinkers were the guys in the 30s and 40s who were speaking to Mussolini and who were speaking to Hitler. And while Bannon claimed not to advocate or embrace their ugliest ideas, he said, that is who I look to for intellectual substance.
But that was like Julius Spengler. I mean, that was Blut und Erde, blood and earth, blood and soil was the catchphrase that was used in Germany. Type of nationalism. That was a racialized nationalism, as opposed to what I think is probably an acceptable nationalism of this is my country. It's a great country. I love it. And I want it to be better. I mean, that's a whole different thing in a way.
Yeah, I think that's right. In Bannon's nationalism certainly goes beyond just a kind of a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, economic populism. He does strike those notes, although he hasn't done a lot to carry it out since he's been in the White House. But I think that Bannon understands it on a propaganda level as well. When I first met Bannon, I tell the story in the book. I traveled. He was doing a documentary film about Sarah Palin at the time, and he thought it was an homage to the late Soviet filmmaker from the 1920s, Sergei Eisenstein, one of the great propagandists. And I traveled out to Pella, Iowa for the debut of Bannon's film with Bannon and Andrew Breitbart, who was still alive at the time. And afterwards, I was interviewing Breitbart about Bannon, because Bannon was still this kind of unknown figure who had just emerged on the scene. And Breitbart said to me, Steve Bannon is the Leni Riefenstahl of the Tea Party movement, citing the Nazi propagandist. And this is a label that Bannon embraced. I mean, he really does look to these people for inspiration, and a lot of his movies and even some of the language you can trace right back to them, because I think Bannon believes that this is effective.
I wonder if that's why Kellyanne is referring to the force of will, or in fact, it was wasn't one of Trump's speeches recently about the power of will and
the power of will. I mean, all of Trump's speech you could listen to.
Triumph of the Will is Leni Riefenstahl's movie, for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Yes, that's right. And in fact, one of Bannon's films, I can't remember, I think it's In the Face of Evil, a documentary he did on Ronald Reagan. Look at the opening scene in Riefenstahl's movie and look at the opening scene in Bannon's movie. It's the same thing. It's someone looking out an airplane window as it flies through the car. Intentional homage to a Nazi propagandist, which Bannon thinks has real power. Power to motivate the kinds of people, these alt-right folks who really haven't been actively involved in electoral politics until Donald Trump.
Well, apparently it is real power. I mean, he's president now. We just Joshua, we just have a minute till we're going to hit a hard break here. What should people expect or do or understand as a result of your research going forward?
I think you should understand that as crazy as these guys seem, and as hard a time as they're having on cable television, they understand something viscerally about how to manipulate the fears and anxieties of the American electorate. And really a large part of the story in Devil's Bargain is telling you how they did this from the inside. Bannon in particular I would not underestimate their ability to continue to do this, even though it looks like right now, like the administration is flatlining. They are real. There's real power there. Bannon and Trump are both willing to go further than they have, and I think that's really the thing to look for.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Reichstag fire.
Yes.
I mean, I'm serious. I'm waiting for some horrible event, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a terrorist event, or maybe even like the Reichstag fire was apparently a false flag operation. I'm waiting for something that they can hang on, on the hook of, we're going to suspend civil rights and declare a state of emergency. Do you think I'm crazy, Joshua? Real quickly, we got about 10 seconds.
I think that you can't rule anything out with these guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Joshua Green, senior national correspondent for Bloomberg Businessweek. The new book, Devil's Bargain. It's brilliant. Check it out. You can tweet him at Joshua Green.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Joshua just hung up. Okay. Well, thank you, Joshua. Devil's Bargain is the book. Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the storming of the presidency. And welcome back. The fascinating book, Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green. Let's see here. John in Minneapolis watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to, this dovetails nicely as to, what you guys were talking about just now. But police brutality, because along with Nazism, fascism, that kind of government, you have a lot of police brutality. And I wanted to say that I think that we're already like three-quarters there. Like, for instance, in the Alton Sterling case, the person who took the video was harassed by the military police in coordination with the police department. I forget what town it happened in Louisiana, but with that police department. And so, you're just already seeing it. And then, the case that has happened here with Miss Damon, I think her last name is Damond. Let's see, with Philando Castillo's mother had said that, beware, everyone. Beware, they're going to come after your mixed-race children and then everybody else. And, she's absolutely, it's a chilling statement, but it's absolutely right. I think that that's what we're looking at, that's what we're dealing with, and I don't think it's an exaggeration for me to say it. And besides which, even if it is a bit of an exaggeration, it's something that we, need to be incredibly vigilant, if you had any relatives at all who have suffered under the oppression of totalitarian regimes and were murdered in the Holocaust and whatnot. And even if you haven't, I mean, it's just your common humanity that you should be concerned about that, vigilant about that, and, if something, we need to be constantly vigilant and thinking about it and actually doing things about it to prevent such a thing from happening again, because it can very easily happen again.
Yeah. Well, and it may well be that it already is happening.
Yes. Yep.
That we're a ways down that road already. That we've lost a lot of our democracy. Everything from all the military stuff that was passed, the Patriot Act, and everything else after 9/11, to the ongoing efforts of the Trump administration.
If I can say one more thing, very nice people are willing to allow democracy to just go by the wayside because they're frightened. And they're also, I think, secretly bigoted, and they just don't like any kind of. I could go on for quite a while, but you have plenty of other callers. But they don't like any kind of conflict, or critique at all. It's just amazing. Not only are we brainwashed to not liking critique, but we also think that nothing ever. People are never supposed to protest. I mean, isn't that what we did when we shook off the British? We had a revolution. I don't necessarily agree with violent revolution, but that's what happened. And for me, actually good reasons. So it's part of our, it's part of our system to, express that. And I think that we need to be planted, as they say, and there are just certain things. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, there's people in the streets trying to defend democracy from Venezuela to Turkey, and well, we've had people in the streets here, I guess, the day after the inauguration. It seems like it should be ongoing. John, excellent points all. Thanks for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. Thanks for watching Free Speech. We'll be good.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, this whole, Steve Bannon and Svengali or whatever, whomever. So that's happening. Meanwhile, this morning in the Washington Post, Nancy Pelosi wrote an op-ed. In the New York Times, Chuck Schumer wrote an op-ed, the leaders of the Democrats in the House and Senate, respectively. And the one in the Washington Post by Nancy Pelosi is titled, Americans Deserve Better Than the GOP Agenda, so we're offering a better deal. They're rolling out this new slogan, a better deal, better jobs, better wages, better future. And, it seems to me like it's not quite as hard-hitting as it could be or should be, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe this is, by the way, I believe the title came from an article that Tim Kaine wrote about 6 months ago. But, Pelosi goes on and she's talking about explicitly, what they're going to do. First, Democrats are pledging themselves to a goal of creating good-paying, full-time jobs for 10 million more Americans over the next 5 years. It is time to ignite an era of investment in America's workers, empowering all Americans. We're calling for a new tax credit for employers to train and hire workers at a good wage, and a massive new national commitment to expand apprenticeships and paid on-the-job training that advances their skills and careers. Americans know that a better deal for the American people demands strong action to tackle rising costs that are eating up families' budgets. Prescription drug prices are jacked up, and Americans have fewer options that increase costs. Large communications companies merge, and families see fewer options and higher bills. Agricultural giants consolidate while farmers struggle and prices in Americans' shopping carts rise. The price of gas goes down, but plane tickets become more expensive and airlines keep adding fees. With this agenda, Democrats pledge ourselves to breaking the grip of the special interests and confronting the rising everyday costs that families have endured for too long. And they say this is the impetus behind our second proposal to put economic power in the hands of the American people, cracking down on the monopolies and big corporate mergers that harm consumers, workers, and competition. We will demand that proposed mergers meet tough new standards to protect competition before approval, and will institute post-merger reviews to ensure that consolidated companies keep their promises to American consumers. Why not stop the mergers and start breaking up the big companies right now? Anyway, third, Democrats will take an unprecedented aggressive action to lower the cost of prescription drugs. We will leverage the power of Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices, force drug manufacturers to open their books and justify cost increases, and create a strong independent enforcement agency empowered to end outrageous, non-justified prescription drug price gouging. I think if you just demanded that we could import drugs from other countries, that would do the same thing. But, so it sounds, I guess, like I'm criticizing this. I still think it's great that they've got something. Better deal, better wages, better jobs, better wages, better future. Your thoughts about that, and also around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fascinating piece over at Alternet. How do you talk to your children about Donald Trump
and the current state of American politics.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading an excerpt from Robert Wolfe's book, Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing. I wrote the foreword for it. Robert Wolfe just died just a few months ago, just this last year, in Hawaii. Louise and I visited him there a number of times. He was in his 90s. And back in the 1950s, he was an anthropologist and sociologist who had been hired by the Malaysian government to figure out why this one particular Aboriginal tribe, the Sonoy, who lived deep inside the jungle, hunting-gathering tribe, why they were, quote, lazy, why they were unwilling to work in the rubber plantations. And he got to know them, and he discovered that their view of the world was completely different than ours. And that's essentially what this book is about, and it's absolutely a mind-boggling book. I'll share a little. This is from the middle of the book. This is page 86. It's finally he's reached the point where they'll let him sleep in the village with them. He says, in time, I grew to know them better. But it was when I began to overnight in their villages that I learned that they literally lived in another reality. When it became dark, people huddled together for warmth and companionship. In the tropics, there's no long period of dusk. It grows dark quickly. The air would become cool, and people would move closer together, reaching out, touching a neighbor, perhaps holding hands. Women might run their fingers through the hair of the person sitting next to them. During the nights I stayed over, they would often gather around me and have me ask them questions. Then they would ask me questions, very quietly and softly. Our being together was not like other social situations I'd ever experienced. We talked, but softly. They did not know how to compete for attention. A few words now and then were all that were spoken, a question or a comment, a simple answer, long silences. Sometimes someone would have some tobacco and light a cigarette, tobacco rolled into a leaf, which was passed around the group. People might ask each other whether they had noticed that particularly bright patch of sunlight on the side of the river behind a certain tree, or if they had noticed that large yellow bird that sang in the morning. Evening was a time of reflection, of gentle communication, of being together. I never knew their blood relationships, but evening times felt like family. As it grew later, one of the people would get up to go into one of the houses, more often little more than lean-tos or rickety huts on stilts, and fall asleep. Eventually, each of us had found an empty spot on the floor of one of the shelters, and wrapped in our sarongs, we huddled close to whoever else slept in that house that night. The houses did not belong to anyone. It seemed that each of the 4 or 5 little shelters was for all the people living in that settlement at that moment. We would fall asleep whenever we chose, and I'm sure with whomever we wanted to spend the night. Yes, people had sex, but even that was gentle, quiet, and discreet. Occasionally, someone might turn over and bump into a couple being a little too acrobatic or noisy, and there would be a grunt. Or people might move away from a couple that made too much to do about their lovemaking. Passionate lovemaking between young people often took place during the day, outside in a more hidden spot in the jungle, I was told. In the morning, we might not all wake up at the same time, but those who woke up early would lay quietly, waiting for more people to awaken. And somehow, as if by magic, we would find ourselves sitting in a circle, rubbing our eyes, stretching the kinks out. One person would say, I saw a bird, a beautiful bird. Someone else would say, yes, I too saw a bird. What kind of bird was it? Another would ask. And so they would create a story with images from our dreams. They did not think that they were sharing dreams as we think of dreams. The Sonoy believed that the world we live in is a shadow world, and that the real world is behind it. At night, they believe, we visit the real world. In the morning, we share what we saw and learned there. The story that was created around the memories that 4 or 5 people brought back from the real world set the tone for that day. Sometimes one of the group would take the lead in soliciting input from each person in the room. How about you? What do you remember? Other times, the story flowed without help. A few times, no story emerged at all. It was very obvious that when a more or less coherent story was created around the images we shared, we who had slept in that shelter would live that story that day. Usually, the stories were simple. A bird had shown the way to a tree that was bearing fruit. Later that day, some of us would find that tree, and of course, it did have ripe fruit. Or the story was about a bad storm, so people would stay close to the shelters all day, and yes, there was a big storm in the late afternoon. Occasionally, the stories were about things that affected all of them, all the people in the settlement, or perhaps even all the Sonoy.
In that case, they would make it a point to share with the people who had slept in other shelters as soon as possible. It might take all morning to disseminate that story to everyone. I did not witness any attempts to call a meeting, but it was obvious that when a serious story came out of a morning's dream telling, all the people in the settlement would eventually hear that story. I learned about all of this very early during the time that I spent with the Sonoy. It was in what I thought of as the first village, the first settlement I visited, that an important story emerged from what I brought back from the real world during one of my nights there. It made a big impression on me because part of the story came from my dream. It was a particularly vivid dream about one of my family's dogs, an all-black mongrel that seemed to have come with the house we rented in the suburbs of Kuala Lumpur. We had tried to get rid of that dog. In fact, one of the first days after we moved we had run over to over the poor dog in the driveway, but he would not leave. I tried chasing him away. He kept coming back. So we adopted him and called him Jaga, which is Malay for guard or protector. I do not remember that Jaga was a particularly good watchdog, but he was around. And he goes on to tell his dream, and then it's just an absolutely fascinating story. Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing by Robert Wolfe.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Marie in Oak Creek, Colorado. Hey, Marie, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Well, I think that you were absolutely spot on when you said that this is an extermination event. I think Steve Bannon has a very carefully thought through ideology that includes destruction. I mean, he even said, I want nothing less than the destruction of the administrative state.
Yeah, or deconstruction, I think is the word.
Deconstruction, I'm sorry. But in that is still destruction.
Yeah.
And we may not have concentration camps yet, although I would argue that cities are being created.
We have a quarter of the world's prisoners.
Yes, we do.
I lived in Germany for a year. Louise and I visited, what was the one just outside of Munich? It wasn't a death camp, it was a work camp, but they ended up putting ovens in there. Dachau, thank you. We've walked through there twice with our kids. And, the people nearby, they just thought it was a prison camp. Well, and originally, I guess it started out that way. So, and now we've also got the ICE, thousands of people in these ICE prisons, these immigration prisons that are growing and have been privatized. So I'm not sure I would say we don't have concentration camps. We don't have death camps, but, that didn't come until much later in the Nazi regime.
Well, but I would argue that we have death camps, too. The destruction of Planned Parenthood and what that does to women's health.
Well, I don't want to compare that to the Holocaust. I mean, let's just.
No. I'm not comparing it to the Holocaust, but I think it is a slower form of eradication of people.
Yeah, and doing away with health care. I mean that.
Yes.
Harvard University, 45,000 Americans a year.
We've got to connect the dots.
Yep.
I think this is all a carefully thought out ideology, and Steve Bannon has explicated it through Breitbart. And if we connect all these dots, we'll begin to see that this is an extermination event.
Yeah, this is not a new playbook. I was reading. I was reading it a month or so ago. I mentioned it on the air a couple times, and then. I think the boat got cleaned up, and I have no idea where it went. So I've stopped reading it now. But it was Fritz Tyson's book. He was the guy who was the principal funder of Hitler, and the title of the book is something like "I was Hitler's financier." And throughout the book, he's saying, we funded this and we funded that, and we had no idea Hitler was going to do this and that. But it's like you've got the Koch network and the Mercers and the Adelson and all these billionaires who are funding this whole giant right-wing machine, and the giant right-wing machine is starting to turn on people. It's turning on Muslims, it's turning on immigrants, it's turning on people of color in this country. Now all the so-called blowback against Black Lives Matter, et cetera. This racist mentality is. Just, this is classical stuff. This is obviously what happened in Germany and Spain and Italy in the 30s.
It's what's happening in Turkey right now. It's what's happening in Hungary right now. It's what's happening in Poland right now. I mean, it's happening all over the world, and it's just, I agree. Maria, I need to move along, but thank you. Very, very well said. Al in Alfred, Maine. Hey, Al, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to ask you a question. You know the book, The Plot to Seize the White House?
I remember the title. I'm not sure I ever read it. Was this the book about Smedley Butler back in the 30s?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And, Tom, that book, do you think it has any relationship to what's happening today?
I haven't read the book, or at least I haven't read the entire book. I'm pretty sure I've read pieces of it online. Back, a couple of years ago, we had a kind of a Smedley Butler week here on this show, and I read all kinds of stuff. But what part of it, you seem more familiar with it than me, Al. What part of the book is it that you're talking about?
Well, the corporate interest in Butler to get him to lead the march of the veterans so they could take control of the White House.
Right.
And to me, it looks like that's what's going on today. Corporate America's got control of the White House.
Yeah, it's a little different though. I mean, that plot by the big industrialists of 1933, that, or maybe 34, whichever year it was. That plot was driven essentially from the top down. It was the billionaire industrialists saying to the most famous Marine general in the history of the United States, we want you to help stage a coup. So this was all top-down stuff. The coup has happened. There's no doubt about that. The Republicans are in control of the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the White House. That coup has happened, but it was driven not from the top down, arguably, but from the bottom up. That is to say, rather than going directly to the levers of power at the top, they went down to the grassroots, to the people, through Fox News, through right-wing hate radio, through the literally hundreds of right-wing websites out there, the right-wing media empires, the three large companies that own the majority of radio stations in the United States that are all running right-wing hate radio. All of this stuff together, this vast right-wing conspiracy that Hillary Clinton identified in '93, this whole thing together created the consensus that brought us this Republican control. And it's, it has been a coup, and I don't think it's been a legitimate one. I think the only reason that they've been able to hold it together is because of voter suppression and gerrymandering. Democrats, I think last election was the exception to this, but in most of the recent elections, Democrats have gotten more votes for the House of Representatives than Republicans, but Republicans control the House. Democrats get more votes nationwide for senators, but Republicans control the Senate. Democrats in most of the recent elections where a Republican won president, Democrats got more vote. I think the only exception to that was Bush's reelection. And so, what we're seeing here is something that is fundamentally not democratic. It's not legitimate. But yeah, I would not hesitate to call it a coup. Al, I need to move along, but thank you. Well said. Sue in Mountain Home, Arkansas. Did I click it? There we go. Sue in Mountain Home, Arkansas. Hey, Sue, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
All the recent shootings with the cops and the civilians, especially this last one, I've never heard it. Maybe you can enlighten me, but I haven't heard it from the corporate news, and I haven't heard it from you either. Do you think that some of these officers are veterans and they have PTSD?
I know two of the cops, and I don't remember which of the individual people that they shot, but I remember two of the, might have been the guy who shot Michael Brown, and there was another one, were, Iraq War veterans. But frankly, most of these shootings have not been by cops who were veterans. They have been by cops who've been cops since they were, in their teens or 20s and joined the force. I think that what we're looking at, Sue, is not a PTSD problem here. That may be percolating through the system, but I think the big problem is police culture, a culture of we are above the law, we are we have the power. there's a brutality and violence, a masculinity, a testosterone associated with police culture in the United States right now that you do not find in other developed countries. And then you combine that with the hyper-militarization of the police, which began during the Reagan administration as a way of funneling more money, this time from police departments rather than the Pentagon, to the defense contractors who were funding the Reagan administration, or who were funding the Reagan campaigns and the Republican campaigns. And the result is a corrosive and corrupt police culture that has been further corrupted by hyper-militarization, by everybody now wearing bulletproof vests and face masks and anonymizing themselves and carrying giant weapons and these god-awful the water tanks and the sound tanks and the crowd control stuff that actually provokes riots rather than preventing them. In my opinion, that's the core of it. And whenever we talk about the danger of hiring vets who have PTSD, we have to be really careful because there's a lot of good vets, some of whom who have PTSD, who are still going to be great employees and great people and great members of their community. And we don't want to be ostracizing them or essentially discriminating against them simply because they served our country and during a time of war, even regardless of what we think of that war. So
I don't mean to say that in any way.
No, I understand that, Sue. I understand your intentions, but I think that better PTSD work with veterans, whether they're veterans who end up as members of a police department or whether they're veterans who end up as mail carriers. There shouldn't be a single person in the United States with PTSD. There are treatments for this, both psychological and psychiatric. And they should be far more widely available. Some very effective treatments. So anyhow, Susan, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. I think this is a really important, and thank you, Sue. It's a really important point. I mean, what is provoking the violence that is being visited upon the American people by our police? And, the majority of the people that cops kill in the United States are white people, but, disproportionately they're killing black people, but they're killing everybody. And why? Why is it that, fully developed countries have virtually no police violence?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But we instead seem to be going the road of, petty dictatorships, with massive police violence, and it's basically only since the 1980s. And welcome back. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, my favorite fellow dilettante. How you doing, Tom?
Thank you, James. Dilettante. You and me? Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, look it up.
I know what it means.
A couple points of correction. It's Elbridge Gerry with a hard G.
Right.
Okay, and the word, you educate a lot of people. We need to tell people the word is, save some time. It's disfranchise, not disenfranchise, which is a redundancy.
Okay.
And concerning the police, Tom, they pointedly don't hire them for sensitivity.
Oh, I know that. In fact, there are some police departments where if your IQ is over 120, they won't hire you.
And they are using steroids. A lot of the police own that. They do use steroids.
Sure.
Now about prisons, do we deserve any better than what we have when we treat our outcasts so badly? We desperately need prison reform. No one should be raped, beat up, or murdered while under the care and protection of the state.
Yep.
And yet it's always gone on, and it yet goes on.
Well, it's always gone on in the United States. Did you see Michael Moore's movie, Where to Invade Next?
No, I didn't.
I strongly recommend that, James. He went to Norway and checked out their prison system. And it was maybe not the only, but it was the point in the movie that I remember actually wiping tears off my face as I was watching the end of it, because he goes through this whole Norwegian prison system and how it works and how humanely it treats people and, what an incredibly high rate of recovery they have, what an incredibly low recidivism rate. And then he wraps it up with, footage from American prisons. And it was just terrible stuff.
Sounds beautiful. You've got me in tears now.
Yeah. Well, check it out, James. And thanks a lot for the call. Mike in my fellow dilettante, right? Mike in Center, North Dakota. Hey, Mike, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Oh, I love your show, Tom. Thanks. Hey, I got a couple issues here. You mentioned cops. I'm just typical
blue-collar guy. Yes, I've done some federal time for growing pot. You know, I'm from the big city, raised in Newark, New Jersey. You know, anybody ever take a research on, you know, I go to work in the morning to a convenience store, and everybody grabs these Red Bulls and stuff like that. How many of these things do these cops consume every day?
Oh, yeah.
2, wages have cut down our tax base. Our tax base has cut down the police base. These guys are overworked. No matter how you look at it, they're overworked. Okay, but that wasn't the point.
Well, and that also leads to civil asset forfeiture. You know, they're all, you know, 2 years ago in 2015, police took more than $3.2 billion from Americans who were convicted of no crime whatsoever. That's more than all the money robbers, in-person robberies in the United States took in the same year. Cops are robbing us more than robbers.
Double jeopardy clause on convictions and seizures as being, you know, convicted twice of the same crime. That's probably why that remedy was there. Is like, yeah, they could seize the assets, and then they let you walk.
Yeah, they've tried that defense in court. It doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately.
Hey, the one main point I made on here was the voter suppression part of this deal with Trump now and everything going on. You know, we have a lot of states now that are majority red-wing, right-wing, you know, legislatures and anything like that. Where is there a source, an educational source, that we can find as a plain old layman out here to teach people who don't vote and, you know, get them into voting? You know, we could probably use the wage clause that we're trying to build up $15 an hour wage. Which is great for rural America. I don't know about big cities.
I think people need to feel like they actually have somebody worth voting for. I think that's the big problem right now. Mike, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thanks for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rewire is reporting more than 380,000 Georgia voters received purge notice. This is amazing. More than 380,000 Georgia voters received a purge notice in their local board of elections under the direction of the Georgia Secretary of State's office. This is the office that Karen Handel used to run. She's now, you know, after a giant purge of voters in the 6th District of Georgia, she won the election by a squeaker, and now, well, anyhow. The ACLU sent a letter earlier this month to Secretary of State Brian Kemp and to the chairperson of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections, alleging that these notices, when sent to voters who moved within the same county, violate the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. Fulton County resident Stacey Hopkins received an official piece of mail on July 3rd. Is that after the election or before? That's after the election. Yeah, okay. On July 3rd, informing her that if you do not return the attached card within 30 days, you will be moved to inactive voter status. And she said, it's the day before Independence Day. I opened it up, read the first line, and to be honest, the first thing my mind said was, this is bull. Because of the work I've done doing voter registration in the state and being a part of a coalition of voter empowerment, I immediately recognized it for what it is. It's amazing. 380,000 people, 6.5% of all active registered voters in Georgia. And it's like the purges roll on. I mean, it just keeps on going on. Roger in Bangor, Maine, listening on WZON. Hey, Roger, what's up?
Hey there. I'm just getting out of work, and I was listening to you in my vehicle. And some of the stuff you're talking about, I'm reading a book called The Plot Against America, written by Philip Roth. I mean, it's...
This is back in the 70s, wasn't it?
No, it was written, I think, 2007. Yeah, it was published. And of course, he's the same guy that wrote Portnoy's Complaint. But this book, even though it's fiction, what it talks about is just incredibly like what happened last year.
Huh.
A very, very...
The Plot Against America by Roth.
Right, and it tells of Lindbergh, who historically was a very avid Adolf Hitler supporter.
Right.
And how he gerrymandered the election process and got elected president when everybody said he didn't stand a chance.
You're talking Hitler.
What's that?
Oh, in the fictional story, Lindbergh gets elected president.
In the fictional story, how he never stood a chance to become America's president.
Right.
And he did become, and everything that he did was, creating hate, having his stormtroopers attack his resistors and whatnot, very much similar to what Trump and his villainies are doing now.
Amazing. I'm going to have to check that out. Roger, thanks for the heads up on that, and thanks for listening to WZON. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Dion, what's up?
Yes, I don't think Schumer's better deal is ambitious enough. It didn't include single-payer coverage. It didn't include the legalization of marijuana. It didn't include, I think $15 an hour is not good enough. I know in Los Angeles, if you make $70,000, you're lower middle class. And then if you make $17 an hour, you need another part-time to at least make rent in Chicago. So do you think it was ambitious enough and at least a rough draft?
I think that this is just my personal opinion, and I hope I'm wrong. My sense, because there's backup stuff to come down the road, and again, I think that they should have rolled this out the way Newt Gingrich did. He had 10 pieces of legislation. Well, he had actually 5 pieces of legislation, but he created his 10-point plan, to his contract on America, and 6 of those points pointed to one piece of legislation, which was a tax cut for billionaires, and then 4 of them pointed to 4 separate pieces of legislation, and said, "Here's our agenda." And with that, they took the entire House of Representatives in 1996, 4, I think, whatever year it was, anyhow, in the middle of the Clinton administration. And that was the first time that the Republicans, outside of one congressional cycle during the Harry Truman administration, it was the first time that Republicans had held the House of Representatives since 1932. And this was in the 90s. I mean, just consider 60 years with basically no Republican input, because Americans saw what the Republicans did by deregulating and privatizing things. This was Warren Harding in 1920, ran on this campaign platform of more business in government, less government in business. In other words, privatize and deregulate. And it led directly to the Great Depression. And, the American people didn't forget that until the 90s. And I don't think it's a coincidence that was just after the rise of right-wing hate radio and Fox so-called news as well. So anyhow, I think that they should be far more emphatic and far more specific. But I get it that they're, and I really got this when Tom Perez was in the studio last week, that they're having to balance, keeping the Joe Manchins of the party in the party and keeping the Elizabeth Warrens of the party in the party, and they had to meet and the needs of all those constituencies, and that's a tough one. I frankly would be narrowing the constituencies that I'm trying to serve, but which is what the Republican Party did. And you could say, well, that's not working out well for the Republican Party. I would say it's working out brilliantly. It got them power. It got control of the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court, and it got them the control of 30 some odd state houses across the country. I think it's 32 or 33 right now. Even though it meant going against some of their own so-called centrist Republicans, they said, okay, tough luck. We're going to put out a statement of principles that we stand for. It's not principles that I think most Americans like. It's principles that work to the benefit of billionaires and transnational corporations, and we're going to do this. And so now they have the power. The problem that the Republicans have is that now that they have the power and they're trying to put into place these billionaire-friendly policies, the rest of America is going, hey, wait a minute. The billionaires don't have to worry about health insurance, but we do. Billionaires don't have to worry about infrastructure, but we do. The billionaires don't have to worry about whether, they can vote or not, but we do. Why are, the American people are waking up to this. Whereas if the Democrats had power, we've tried the Democratic policies. I mean, the classic. I'm not talking about, DLC stuff. I'm talking about Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson, the New Deal and the Square Deal and the Great Society. We have tried those things, and they worked. And they only stopped working when Republicans were able to take big chunks out of them. Or even worse than Republicans, corporate Democrats taking big chunks out of them. I personally think the Democratic Party needs to embrace a progressive agenda. It's actually where more than 70% of Democrats, more than 50% of the American public are at on virtually every issue. Yes, free education, universal health care,
do something about the climate, break up the big monopolies, including media monopolies. I mean, this is straightforward stuff. Dion, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from ADD Success Stories, a guide for fulfillment to fulfillment for families with attention deficit disorder. And it's really individuals as well. And mostly the book is well over 100 individual stories about ways that people have learned how to be successful in life, and just sharing them with others. A lot of these came from when I ran the ADD forum on CompuServe, and a lot of these are, other people's stories from CompuServe, some of them from when Louise was coaching, when we were running the community for ADHD kids, all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, this is from chapter 5, page 47, titled Learning How to Handle Criticism and Self-Criticism. And it opens with a quote from Benjamin Disraeli in 1860. He said, "It's much easier to be critical than to be correct." One of the most common and recurring strategies that successful hunters, that's people with ADD, tell about is how they've learned to handle criticism. A successful ADD entrepreneur tells the story of how devastated he was in a high school presentation that he'd spent the better part of 2 months on for English class. He read dozens of books, dug out arcane facts, sifted through quotes and stories and information, all to find what he thought was the absolutely perfect summary to make his point. With great enthusiasm, he pulled an all-nighter, writing the final paper, and marched off to school the next day with his head high and the smell of academic victory in his nostrils. At 2 o'clock, he walked into his English classroom and marched up to the teacher's desk, a paper in his hand. "Here it is," he said, and handed it to her with a dramatic flourish. She took one glance at it, leaned over the side of the desk, and dropped it into the wastebasket. "You didn't double spaces," she said. "When are you going to learn to read the directions?" Stunned, he began to protest, to tell her about the hours of work he'd done. She shook her head as if shaking his words out of her ears, and interrupted him, saying, "You have to learn how to do things right. This will be a good lesson for you. I'm giving you an F for that paper, and there's no appeal because today was the last day you could hand it in." He went home that night, and at the ripe old age of 14, cried himself to sleep. "I learned 2 important lessons from that experience," he told me 20 years later. The first was that I needed to slow down, to force myself to read directions. In that regard, it was probably a positive experience. But it also almost destroyed my commitment to her, to the class, to the school, and to any future academic achievement. And that was where I learned my second and most important lesson. When you fall down, stand back up, dust yourself off, and carry on. That sounds easy, I said, but how do you do it? How do you go from being angry about her, from blaming her, or for that matter, from blaming yourself? I have a picture in my mind, he said, of a man who's walking down a dusty rural road. He trips on a stone and falls face first into the dirt. Then he reaches over to the side of the road, grabs a stick, and begins to beat himself over the head with a stick, yelling at himself about how stupid he was to trip and fall. Between these comments, he's cursing the stone for being there and blaming it for tripping him. That's absurd, isn't it? But that's just what many people do. And when I imagine that picture and I see how absurd it is to wallow in self-blame, I feel empowered to get on with my life. End of quote. Unfortunately, the absurd behavior that this entrepreneur described is just what so many people do, particularly those who've spent their lives feeling like they've never quite lived up to their potential. They respond to criticism first by blaming the critic and then by beating themselves up. They rationalize the former by taking a debating position, finding flaws in the criticism or the critic, and then rationalize the latter by telling themselves that if they beat themselves up emotionally, they'll learn from the experience. In real life, it rarely works that way. People who pursue this strategy instead just end up bruised and ineffectual, paralyzed by fear of criticism or by the damage they do to themselves in the name of lesson learning. So how can we best handle criticism? And then we go through some more stories. The first step is to examine the criticism to see if there's any truth in it. Usually there is some truth to criticism, and if we can separate out the kernel of truth from the emotional baggage associated with it, we could often learn something useful. For example, when my first book on ADD was published, one reviewer wrote a scathing and sarcastic commentary on it. While much of the commentary was off base or factually inaccurate, he did point out one real deficiency. My premise of Hunters and Farmers was based on anthropology, but I hadn't gotten the endorsement of any anthropologists or cited any anthropological texts in my bibliography. So, deciding that he had a point, I sought out people with the requisite knowledge of hunting and farming culture. I first found Will Kreinen, MD, who, while not an anthropologist, was one of the few medical doctors in the world to have spent years of his career as the physician to an indigenous hunting society, one of the last of the Native American tribes in Canada. Every year, he followed them with his small plane as they made their annual 1,000-mile trek with the caribou they hunted. He told me that when he first arrived, he found that the previous doctor had diagnosed 100% of their children with ADD and put the entire school on Ritalin. That, for me, was a pretty good validation of the hunter-farmer theory. Then I met cultural anthropologist Jay Fikes, PhD, who wrote the famous books debunking Carlos Castaneda. Dr. Fikes obtains his PhD by studying the few remaining Native American hunting societies of the American Southwest and northern Mexico. After reading my book, he wrote a ringing endorsement of it, saying that his experience taught him that hunting and agricultural societies were profoundly different, and that the individuals who make them up are profoundly different. There's a startlingly high percentage of what we would call ADD among some of the members of native hunting tribes. So that criticism of my book, as sarcastic and stinging as it was, made the book better. Anyhow, the book is ADD Success Stories, A Guide to Fulfillment for Families with Attention Deficit Disorder.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the news department here, the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, co-founded by Paul Weyrich back in the day. This is one of the many organizations that came out of the Powell memo, where the Lewis Powell, who went on to be on the Supreme Court, told the billionaire backers over at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, it's time to get politically active. Stop just being business people and start putting your money in politics. Buy politicians, buy courts, buy judges, set up think tanks, buy media, invest in schools. That is to say, create for-profit schools and endow chairs and whatnot in universities to get the right-wing message out, to get the pro-corporate message out, to get the message of oligarchy and fascism out. Although these are not how he referred to them, And David Daly wrote a great piece over at Alternet In fact, Dave was on our show last week. And it's hang on just a second here. He's the author of this book, Rat Effed: Why Your Vote Doesn't Count. And he's talking about Alex's scary plan for electing your senators. And they've come up with model legislation to do away with the 17th Amendment, to end the 17th Amendment. Now, the 17th Amendment was ratified in 1914. And, what it says is, the Constitution originally says that the individual states would send 2 senators to Washington, D.C. It doesn't say how. And so in some states, the senators were elected by the state Senate or the state House or both. In some states, the senators, the U.S. senators, were appointed by the governor. I'm not sure if there were any states before 1917 who actually held elections for their senators. But this was part of this era. It was about a 20-year period from around 1895 until around 1920 or thereabouts, sometimes referred to as the era of the Progressive Revolution or the Progressive Era in the United States, where there was all this great legislation to do away with the corruption that had come about as the result of the emerging oligarchs, the railroad and steel and oil oligarchs, the Rockefellers and Jay Gould and the Dow and DuPont and everybody else. They had so corrupted American politics that, there's a famous story about, one of the copper kings, I'm pretty sure this was in Montana, that he literally went to the state legislature. It was time for them to pick their senator. This was pre-1917. In fact, it was in the late 1800s. And he said, I'm going to be standing at the back of the room with a pocket full of $1,000 bills, and anybody who votes for me for the senator, I'll give you a $1,000 bill on the way out. And guess what? They voted him in as senator, and he passed out the $1,000 bills to them on the way out of the room, and they took the money. And weirdly, that little story out of that one state out in the center of the United States made its way to the press on the East Coast and so horrified the politicians in Washington, D.C. that they refused to seat this guy for months. Eventually, he got his seat, and he became the senator. But that story was the thing that really built the pressure for the 17th Amendment, because that's how corrupt the system was. Well, guess who wants to take us back to a corrupt system? The people who are trying to corrupt our current system, the billionaires of the ALEC-type class. So I encourage you to check this thing out. Just the whole process is bizarre. What they're doing and how they're trying to do this, and look out for this. Another piece by Karen Camp of Moyers and Company over at Alternet. How to talk to your kids about our disastrous president. We are in the midst of a cultural revolution, and our children are our soldiers, is the article. And it talks about Ava Siegler, who wrote a new book, How Do I Explain This to My Kids? Parenting in the Age of Trump. And it raises some interesting questions. All this mudslinging and meanness going on in politics. How do you discuss this with your kids? Actually, I think it might be a great opportunity to talk about bullying in the schoolyard, bullying in school. This is what's happening at the White House. That's a bad example. Don't do it. But, hey, it's nothing new. But on the other hand, and, what is the biggest threat to our children? Of this, she says we must consistently point out when we see disregard for these emotions. That would be empathy, self-control, morality, and realistic self-regard. None of those things seem to be present with the Trump presidency, and we need to point that out to our kids. What do you say to your kids about Donald Trump and about the people around him? How do you explain to your kids that the entire Republican Party, every elected Republican at the federal level, with the exception of either a dozen or 24 of them, it may be a dozen Republicans and a dozen Democrats, or it might be 24 of each. But in any case, that's the max, right? 24 Republicans who are acknowledging climate change, the Climate Change Caucus in Congress. All the rest of them so completely sold out to Koch Industries and ExxonMobil and all the other big fossil fuel companies, Massey and whatnot. So completely sold out to them that they deny climate change is even happening, or deny that it's being done by people. So what do we tell our kids? Where do we go from here? How do you share this with the next generation, or the generation after the next? very often our children are 2 generations down the road. How do we share this? How do we educate them? Is it enough to just give them a copy of 1984 like our parents did with us? And say, here, read George Orwell. He'll tell you, what dystopia means. How do you do this? Anyhow, back with more of your thoughts, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And if you are one of those 380,000 people in Georgia who got a "you are about to be purged from the voting rolls" letter, be sure to send it back. And don't get purged. Welcome back. Lee in Forestville, California. Whoop. Oh, geez, I just dumped Lee. For some reason, my computer's running a little delay on our system, and it didn't seem to click, so I clicked it again. And now Omar in Herndon, Virginia is on the line. Lee, my apologies. I dumped you. Call back, and we'll put you on the air. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. What's on your mind, Omar?
Oh, yes. Hello, Tom. Thanks so much for taking my call. Tom, I just want to talk about this repealing of Obamacare. I think this is a victory for the resistance, and it's really disturbing that the corporate media is not covering it. If this was
as such, yes.
If this was a Tea Party event or Tea Party resistance, it would be on TV all day. I mean, all these states that the senators did not vote for Obamacare, these are red states. They're not majority-minority states. So I think this is a victory that the Democrats need to grab and capitalize on and then use as an example. I mean, Republicans had enough vote to pass Obamacare, to repeal Obamacare, but they couldn't because of the resistance.
Yeah. No disagreement here, Omar. I think you're absolutely right. And it saddens and horrifies me, frankly, the way that the media characterizes our current political situation. They have so normalized the Republican behavior and Trump's behavior and, withholding Garland's nomination for a year, Mitch McConnell, all these things that I would say are crimes against our democracy. Yeah. And, it's just like, boom, down the memory hole, it's just off to the races. What's the next big thing? And part of the problem is that our media is no longer interested in providing news. They're not motivated by news. They're not driven by news. They're motivated and driven by ratings. And so their first question is never, what is the important thing for Americans to know? Or what is it that citizens need to know in order to participate in a democracy? Or, what should our obligation as journalists cause us? What's the story that we should be telling today? What are the things that are going to be most consequential to people's lives? They never ask any of those questions. Instead, the only question they ask is which news story is going to get us the highest ratings today so that we can beat our competition and we can make more money for our stockholders. And when that's the thing that's driving news, you no longer have news. You have a bad form of infotainment, which is, largely unique to the United States. And it's probably why our political system is so screwed up right now. And for that, you can thank Bill Clinton with the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and Ronald Reagan in 1987 doing away with the Fairness Doctrine. And in 1982, Reagan stopping the enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And you add those things together, and what you've got is today's media, corrupt corporate media, that is not telling the truth to the American people, or by omission as much as commission.
And I think this is a perfect example why we need to support free speech and then basically put it on steroids and get it out there because this can get a small vote. The resistance were able to bring in independent. They were able to bring in a Republican for not to have the Republican repeal Obamacare. And I think this is a great victory. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Thank you, Omar. I completely agree. And free speech, and not just free speech. If you're listening to us on one of our Pacifica affiliates, they're all not-for-profit and they're all listener-supported, just like Free Speech TV is. So however you may be getting the show, consider going to their website and tossing a few bucks their way. Because we have a fairly fragile ecosystem, progressive media ecosystem right now, and it needs your support. Thanks for bringing that up, Omar. We'll be back with more of your calls.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Lee in Forestville, California. Hey, Lee, thanks for watching Free Speech on the Dish Network. What's up?
I was wondering if a presidential decree can overturn a law passed by Congress.
No.
But specifically, when I think the first week that Trump was in office, he said that any hog farms or slaughterhouses that have these pools of animal waste could dump them in the nearest waterway.
Right.
Do you recall that?
I do. There were two things. One was actually Congress passed a piece of legislation that enabled the, I believe it was the coal mining companies, to dump more crap in our rivers. And then Trump, through an administrative action, changed the enforcement. As I recall, it was the Waterways of the U.S. Act, but I might be wrong on that. But there were these two pieces, these two things. But yes, what the president has the power to do, Lee, is, Congress will pass a law saying, for example, we don't want mining companies to pollute our rivers. And so we're appropriating, $100 million for the Environmental Protection Agency to do something about polluting our rivers. And then that, so that law passes and it's a clear intent of Congress. Now it becomes the job of the executive branch, the president's branch of government, the second branch. It becomes the job of the executive branch to figure out how to accomplish what Congress wanted. And so, during the Obama administration, they said, okay, here's how we're going to do this. This agency is going to do this, and this sub-agency is going to do this, and these are the regulations that we're writing, and we're going to have comment periods, and we bring the public in, and we bring the industry in, and then we decide on what we're going to do. We put it all together, and we execute it. Because somebody has to do all the detail work that Congress doesn't do. Congress just basically says, we want this, and here's the money. And so then Trump comes in and says, we're just not going to do it that way anymore. We're not going to enforce those rules. And that's happening at the Interior Department right now with regard to public lands. It's happening at the EPA with regard to pollution. It's happening at the USDA with regard to poisoning our food and fecal matter and bacteria. It's happening at the FDA with regard to regulation of our drugs. It is happening right across the board. Every regulatory agency, they're being injured. It's happening at the Department of Labor with regard to inappropriate labor practices by employers. Every single one of them, they're dialing back on their enforcement, and they can do that without an act of Congress. Now, the one thing that can be done to undo that is if, the Trump changes the enforcement of the Streams Act, and so somebody gets poisoned by a coal company. If they can demonstrate a tort, if they can demonstrate a harm, that they have been harmed in some way, and therefore they have standing in court, then they can go into court and they can sue the Trump administration or sue the FDA and say, you're not doing your job and I was harmed as a result of that. And that can go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court can then order the executive branch to actually enforce the law. But number one, with Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, a majority of right-wing Republicans on the Supreme Court, it's unlikely that they're going to do that. And two, it's a long slog to even get to the Supreme Court, and a very expensive one. And individuals who are harmed have a really hard time doing this. And one of Scalia's lasting legacies is taking a bite out of the ability of people to do it by class action. So
It's a real challenge. Lee, am I making sense? Have I answered your question?
Yeah, you did a very good job, Tom.
Okay, good. Lee, thank you so much for the call, and thanks for setting that up for me. Mike in Otsego, New York. Do I have that right, Mike?
That is correct.
Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
I have a little bit different tact on healthcare, and I wanted to bounce it off you.
Okay.
Since most Western countries are socialized or controlled medicine, and we're the only one that's not. The only way big medicine can balance their sheets is by overcharging us to compensate for those that control their costs. Does that sound right?
That argument has been made in the past, and it's been knocked down. The fact of the matter is that the big drug companies are profitable all over Europe. They're profitable in Canada. They're profitable in Mexico. They're just hyper profitable here. No drug company is losing money anywhere in the world right now. A government cannot force a company to sell a product below cost. It's not physically possible. The company.
I'm not saying they're selling below cost, but they're making their balance sheet even fatter with our help.
Well, even fatter, yes. If they're making their balance sheet come to even, then no. That has been rebutted. But yeah, they're making just fine profits all around the world. Here in the United States, they're making insane, bizarre, outrageous, inappropriate profits. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Mike, thanks for the call. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
I just want to talk about how we can get to rural white voters, just like Gingrich did back in the 90s. We just need some simple talking points about free speech. You were talking about how that new bill with, can't talk about the boycott with Israel. And another one we should come up with to attack the banking is just talk of big government bank fraud, something like that. Because actually I was watching, who's somebody who's been right, has been Glenn Beck. And I believe that's the reason he was fired from Fox News was because he brought that guy he wrote Jekyll Island. He's a big backer of public banks. And I think that's why he got,
I thought he got fired because he was promoting anti-Semitic, conspiracy theories. But I don't think that the Democratic Party should be making a specific effort to reach out to rural white voters, particularly if the basis of their vote is racism. We know now that the average income of Trump voters was over $100,000 a year. These were not the $30,000, $20,000 a year people working at Walmart or working at the local 7-Eleven or McDonald's. It's a myth that rural, white, low-income voters made Trump president. The people who really made him president were white women, 53%, and people making over $100,000 a year, or way over the median income, which is the family income is around 50, a little lower than 50, and individual income is a little lower than, it's in the mid-30s. And so, those were the people. And as long as virtually every radio station in rural America is owned by one of three companies that are committed to only programming right-wing radio, and as long as Fox News is being beamed into every home in America free, whereas MSNBC is a premium channel you got to pay an extra $5 a month for, as long as that dynamic stands, you're not going to have much luck reaching the rural white voters. They are locked down by right-wing hate radio and Fox News.
So what kind of message should we put out there? Something simple like, who's that guy with the toupee? I can't think of his name. Frank Luntz.
Yeah, I think you go after everybody. I think that you say to the American people, even rural white voters want Social Security to be strong. Even rural white voters want, a strong social safety net. They may not call it that, but they want it. They want unemployment benefits. They want Social Security. They want Medicare and Medicaid. They want their kids to be able to go to college, without incurring debt. They want an environment that is clean and that works. It's all a matter of how you say it, but I think that there's a collection of issues here that can be put together and promoted in a very, very straightforward way that will get pretty much everybody in America voting for Democrats.
because the Republicans are so wrong on every one of these issues. And rather than slicing and dicing us, I think that they need to come up with an agenda that everybody will buy into. Jeff, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oh, it's actually 27 minutes past the hour. Anyhow, we'll be back with your calls and my thoughts and the news of the day right after this. Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Rebooting the American Dream, from the introduction. It's titled Back to the Future. On April 14th, 1789, George Washington was out walking through the fields at Mount Vernon, his home in Virginia, when Charles Thomson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, rode up on horseback. Thomson had a letter for Washington from the President pro tem of the new constitutionally created United States Senate, telling Washington that he'd just been elected president, and the inauguration was set for April 30th in the nation's capital, New York City. This created two problems for George Washington. The first was saying goodbye to his 82-year-old mother, which the 57-year-old Washington did that night. She gave him her blessing and told him it was the last time he'd see her alive, as she was gravely ill, and indeed she died before he returned from New York. The second problem was finding a suit of clothes made in the United States of America. For that, he sent a courier to his old friend and fellow general from the American Revolutionary War, Henry Knox. Washington couldn't find a suit made in America because in the years prior to the American Revolution, the British East India Company, whose tea was thrown into the Boston Harbor by outraged colonists after the Tea Act of 1773 gave the world's largest transnational corporation a giant tax break. But the British East India Tea Company controlled the manufacture and the transportation of a whole range of goods, including fine clothing. Cotton and wool could be grown and sheared in the colonies, but it had to be sent to England to be turned into clothing. This was a routine policy for England, and it's why until India achieved its independence in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated a year later, sat at his spinning wheel for his lectures and daily spun clothing in his own home. It was, like his Salt March, a protest against the colonial practices of England and an entreaty to his fellow Indians to make their own clothes to gain independence from British companies and institutions, even though making their own clothes or making their own salt was against British law. Fortunately for George Washington, an American clothing company had been established on April 28, 1783 in Hartford, Connecticut, by a man named Daniel Hinsdale. And it produced high-quality woolen and cotton clothing, as well as items made from imported silk. It was to Hinsdale's company that Knox turned, and he helped Washington get, in time for his inauguration 2 weeks later, a nice but not excessively elegant brown American-made suit. He wore British black later for the celebration and the most famous painting, but he was sworn in wearing an American-made suit. When Washington became president in 1789, most of America's personal and industrial products of any significance were manufactured in England or in other British colonies. Washington asked his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, what could be done about that, and Hamilton came up with an 11-point plan to foster American manufacturing, which he presented to Congress in 1791. By 1793, most of its points had either been made into law by Congress or formulated into policy by either President Washington or the various states, which put our country on a path of developing its industrial base and generating the largest source of federal revenue for more than 100 years. Those strategic proposals built the greatest industrial powerhouse the world had ever seen. And after more than 200 successful years, Alexander Hamilton's program was only abandoned during the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and remained abandoned to this day. Modern-day China, however, implemented most of Hamilton's plan just in the 1990s, and has brought about a remarkable transformation of its nation in a single generation. Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers is a primary inspiration for this book. It was part of a larger work titled Alexander Hamilton's Report on the Subject of Manufactures, made in his capacity as Secretary of the Treasury. It's the official title. And then I list Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers. And I'll share just the headlines of this. He starts out by saying, a full view now having been taken to the inducements to the promotion of manufacturers in the United States, in other words, why we should do this, accompanied with an examination of the principal objections, which are commonly urged in opposition. This was Jefferson's objection that he didn't want America to be a manufacturing nation. He wanted us to be an agricultural nation. Hamilton says, it is proper in the next place to consider the means by which it may be effected. So here he says, in order to a better judgment of the means proper to be presented to the United States, it will be of use to advert to those which have been employed with success in other countries. In other words, they're stealing this idea from England. It was called the Tudor Plan when King Henry VII came up with it. So number one, protecting duties, import taxes, now called tariffs, or duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of domestic ones intended to be encouraged. So number one, raise the cost of imported goods. Number two, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions. On some things that we think it's really important to make in America, make the duties, the tariffs, so high that nobody would want to import them, so there'll be a strong domestic manufacturing presence. Three, prohibitions on the exportation of materials of manufacture. Why provide raw materials to other countries, like we're doing right now to China, to make stuff to sell back to us when we can simply make it here, manufacture it here? Number four, pecuniary bounties. This is one of the most efficacious means of encouraging manufacturers, basically, subsidizing growing and new nascent industries. So that's just up to number four. There are 11 points. The rest of it's all in the book, Rebooting the American Dream, and you can find it online.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You can support the Thom Hartmann Program and see video of our entire 3-hour show over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, sipping my beet juice and my hemp milk with coffee. What a selection. Let's see here. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was listening Friday, and you were talking about this bill that is being submitted that people who talk bad about Israel could be convicted and serve 20 years.
In prison, yeah, and $1 million fine.
Yeah, and a friend of mine said it has been submitted by the members of Congress who have dual citizenship in the United States and Israel.
There are several members who are signatories, apparently. From what I've read, I've apparently read the same stories you have, Norma.
Yeah, I don't know, if that's true or not.
Right,
but
I don't either.
For anybody who does not know, you can pull up a map of Palestine from 100 years ago, and it might give you a better idea of what has happened to Palestine. And this is also what's happening to Syria. At one time, there was a country called Kurdistan, and it's gone. And this is what is supposedly going to happen to Syria, and Palestine will cease to exist also. And so people who, do we lose our freedom of speech and being able to speak up and say this is not right, this is not fair? And, it also makes you wonder, who should you invite into your home?
Yeah, it astonishes me, and apparently Ben Cardin was the principal author of this. And the article I read said he had dual citizenship. I don't know if that's true, particularly when it comes to issues that have to do with Israel. Sometimes you get news sources that are coming right out of Stormfront, right out of the alt-right, and they're so full of anti-Semitic crap and disinformation that you just don't know what to think. But this legislation actually, this is crazy stuff. It actually says that if you support the BDS movement, which is the boycott, divest, and what does the S stand for?
I don't remember, but
sanctions. That's right, sanctions on Israel.
It makes me wonder if these people's loyalty to Israel overrides their loyalty to the United States and the American people.
I would think so. And I'm not even sure that it's a loyalty to Israel. I think it's a loyalty to a faction within Israel. Netanyahu has, well, it's not just Zionism. I don't have a problem specifically with Zionism, but the Netanyahu version of it, this hard, militant, racialized version of it is, that virtually does not treat Palestinians as human beings, and justifies an apartheid state in Gaza,
just is really challenging. From particularly when Israel is the largest recipient of American foreign aid, and
something like what, $11 million a day.
I don't know. It's I think it's the baseline was $3 billion a year that was set with the Camp David Accords, as I recall, and but I think that last year it was much more than that. A lot of it was military aid, but on the other hand, I don't know. This is something that needs to be worked out in the region, but to have AIPAC or anybody else come in here and say here's legislation that will put American citizens in prison for 20 years and hit their families with $1 million fine if they speak out against Israel by supporting the BDS movement. That's outrageous. That's a violation of the First Amendment. It's a violation of free speech. And I'm guessing this legislation is going to die a very, very quick and timely death. Norma, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Sean in Strongsville, Ohio. Hey, Sean, what's up?
How are you doing, Tom?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Talk to you online. You're a very brilliant man. So my question is I lived in 3 different countries, and I've lived in 2 countries that had single-payer insurance. The thing I don't understand is why corporate companies would not want this when this would benefit them more than anybody.
There's always been strong corporate support in the United States for single-payer health care. It hasn't been universal. There are some corporations that have come right out and said, we're in favor of this. There was back when Obamacare was being debated, there were a number of very large American corporations who came out in favor of public option, which is a step towards single-payer. Right. The story of Toyota deciding to move to Canada to build a factory after spending a year doing development work here in the United States is kind of legendary. I mean, it's 10, 15 years old, but when they were asked, why did you move to Canada? They said because there's $2,400 worth of health care in every car made in America, and that's not the case in Canada. And so, single-payer health insurance would help American business. It also helps American workers because if your health care is no longer tied to your employer, you're more likely to go off and start your own business, or you're more likely to leave a dead-end job and look for a job that has that you're more passionate about, but perhaps doesn't offer health insurance or doesn't offer as good a health insurance package. It's just health insurance being tied to employment is something that was largely unique to the United States after World War II. It was a deal that the unions worked out with employers to deal with the labor shortage in the late 1940s, early 1950s. And it's an anachronism. It's no longer necessary. It's no longer even useful. In fact, it's destructive both to the companies and to the workers. And it's time to do away with it and say to the billionaires and the multimillionaires who own and run these health insurance companies, these banksters, you guys had a good run. You took trillions of dollars out of our economy and put it into your multiple homes and your mansions and your corporate jets and your islands all around the world and everything else. And, we're not going to try and take that money back from you, but you're not going to make any more from us. And that's just, that's what we need to say. Sean, thank you for the call. Well said. Chris in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you again. Hey, just this thing that Nancy Pelosi op-ed piece about what the Democratic Party wants to do. I think personally, and I think you have expressed this too, that this is not nearly enough. The Republicans are unashamed to cut 32 million people off of health care, and for some reason the Democrats have to apologize or make it, make some sort of rationale for why we should have single-payer health care, or say we shouldn't have it. And we have to go hard. We can't be third way anymore. It doesn't work, and I think that's a lot of the reason why, Clinton's lack of popularity is because it was just the same old thing. And we need a Bernie Sanders platform, to push hard.
I agree with much of what you're saying, Chris, except that the third way was not the same old thing. The third way was, Al Fromm engineered this thing back in the late 80s, and Bill Clinton signed on to it and made him president. And it was basically, the Republican Party is going so far to the right, the Democratic Party can move into that middle right space and pick up large corporate sponsors and make us a national player. And it worked in 92. I mean, it made Bill Clinton president. Although if you read the New Covenant speech that he campaigned on, it is absolutely not the way he governed. He campaigned as a progressive and he governed as a centrist. And I think that was kind of the original sin. And I think the Democratic Party has been wounded ever since then. And so the way it always was FDR and LBJ. I mean, those were the traditional values of the Democratic Party, and they were held by Democrats for decades. And the Democratic Party needs to go back to its 20th century traditional values, to FDR and LBJ, to the Great Society and the New Deal. And I think this, a better plan, it's a good first step. I'll give them that. And every step that the Democratic Party does in the right direction, I applaud, and I'm very happy about. But I think that they have the potential to go so much bigger and so much realer. I'm not sure why they're not. I'm not sure, although my theory, which I laid out, is that, they're trying to satisfy the corporate Democrats as well as the progressive Democrats. Right. And frankly, I think there's probably, it's probably about 50-50 in terms of elected Democrats right now. In the House and in the Senate, it's probably even more corporate Democrats than there are progressives.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the point I'm making is that I agree with you that we need to move away from the third way and go back to what the Democratic Party was before the third way.
Yeah, and that's if Tom Perez was sitting here right now and asked my advice, which he has never done, but if he were to ask my advice, it would be just pretend that you're Franklin Roosevelt. Just start channeling FDR. It'll work today. It worked in the 30s for the exact same reason. Chris, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after. And welcome back. Tom in Urbana, Illinois. Hey, Tom, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hello, Tom. How are you today?
I am well, thank you. What's on your mind?
Well, I appreciate you taking my call. Listen, you were talking earlier about adding a tax to gasoline to cover insurance. Well, now, of course, this is secondhand information. From a friend of mine, we talked about this late 80s, early 90s. California, the insurance companies, they were complaining grossly about how expensive it was to insure all those bad drivers out there. So that idea was floated in the California legislature about adding a tax to gasoline to cover insurance on anything that took gasoline, cars being the largest progenitor of the use of that tax money. Well, interestingly enough, the insurance company said, well, maybe it's not so expensive to insure cars here in California after all. So anyway, that was my point. I wanted to add that little story in. I want to make it quick. You've got other people you want to talk to. So that was my bit for the day.
That's a good one. Tom, thank you.
You take care, my friend.
Yeah,
Bye.
Good talking with you. Thank you so much. Ellen in Manning, Oregon. Hey, Ellen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm the one that called you many years ago when you were still here in Portland about the aviation and spray issue. The amount of aviation toxic sprays that are being used not only on Oregon forests but all over the country that include Monsanto's Roundup, which now has been very clearly designated as a carcinogenic substance, along with things that are much more obviously toxic like atrazine and 2,4-D, are being sprayed, and we want to know what's in these sprays that are being sprayed all over our forests. The fields also are being sprayed by Monsanto, and we want to know why our health care costs are so high. It's because we are poisoning the entire country with these chemical companies who are buying and paying for lobbyists to allow for this poisoning. I would really appreciate a great deal more discussion about how our healthcare system is being affected by the ways that we are poisoning our entire community. I have personal knowledge of many people in the Coast Range of Oregon, from the top of Oregon all the way to southern Oregon, who are suffering from very peculiar forms of cancers that have never been seen before. And there are now, instead of about 2 pounds to 2.5 pounds of these chemicals being sprayed in our forests, they're now spraying 7 to 8 pounds. They are destroying our watersheds. They are destroying our wildlife. But more importantly, they're killing people and crops all over Oregon's west coast.
Sure, and it's not just that. I mean, our environment has become so toxic with all this, better living through chemistry stuff. Our food packaging contains phthalates that are hormone disruptors. Just the receipts you get, the thermal receipts, when you buy your groceries or you buy your cup of coffee, if it's a thermal receipt, the paper has these chemicals that can be absorbed through the skin. Don't touch your receipts. And if you work in one of those places, wear rubber gloves. I mean, everything has become so toxic. And it's like you buy food in restaurants and half of it comes in giant plastic, bags inside boxes with the sauces and everything. And all that stuff is leaking these, chemicals. It's bizarre. Ellen, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News, find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. And on the line with us, Victoria Jones. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
Happy Monday. So what's happening in the world today?
Well, it's going to be a better deal for Democrats this afternoon in Berryville, Virginia.
Okay.
As House and Democratic leaders roll out their new party agenda, which is called a better deal. And they're intentionally traveling outside the Beltway, and they're going into the district of one of the Republican House members that they'd like to defeat next year, and that's Barbara Comstock. Berryville, by the way, is a very nice little area of Virginia with a couple of nice B&Bs. I've stayed in one of them there. So they want to rebrand themselves. One of the things they did after their defeat in November was to send out a number of surveys to Democrats, and they found out, well, actually, we don't know what we stand for. We don't know what the Democrats are about. Okay, so what did we do wrong? That's one of the things we did wrong. Chuck Schumer said on ABC on Sunday is we didn't tell people what we stood for. So the full title of the agenda is A Better Deal, Better Jobs, Better Wages, Better Future. Mm-hmm. So they're coming out with 3 things today, and then there'll be more planks rolled out over time. Today, lowering prescription drug prices. Suggestions include a new agency that could investigate drug manufacturer price hikes, and they would allow Medicare to negotiate directly for the best drug prices. Cracking down on corporate monopolies, Democrats would enact new standards to limit large mergers and create a new consumer competition advocate, and creating millions more jobs. The agenda includes proposals for expanding apprenticeships and providing a tax credit to employers to train and hire new workers.
Right. I'm underwhelmed, but I think it's a good first step. I really do.
Well, and it is their first step because, as I said, they've got other pieces. Some of them will be, I understand, rolled out as part of a sort of contract with America kind of thing, and some of them will be rolled out as legislation. Now, the contract with America is obviously what they would do if they were in power, and the legislation they will roll out as legislation.
Yeah. Although when Newt Gingrich rolled out his contract on America, that's how he got to power.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
Okay, what else is going on in the world, Victoria?
President Trump is putting pressure on Republicans today to approve the Senate's health care bill, which is sort of on its last legs.
Which one?
Well, that's the other question. Now, he says that a showdown vote planned for tomorrow, probably, is their last chance to do the right thing and erase Obamacare. Well, that's the thing. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell hasn't announced exactly what version of the bill lawmakers would consider tomorrow. Now, Senator John Thune is saying, well, yes, they will know what they're going to vote on, and I think the senators are saying, well, we'd like to, actually. It would be rather nice if we would. No. So it will be either repeal or repeal and replace. Now, it's significant, which it is, certainly to Senator Rand Paul, who is one of the no's, probably, because if it is straight repeal, he's likely a yes. He would vote to open debate, because that's what it is. It's not a vote to actually pass a bill. It's a vote to get to debate. And they can only afford to lose, really, probably one vote, because Senator John McCain is not likely to be in Washington because he has brain cancer and is being treated in Arizona.
Right, and Olympia Snow's having none of it.
What?
No, Susan Collins, excuse me.
Susan Collins, right.
Susan Collins, yeah, I'm sorry. Olympia Snow's no longer there. Susan Collins is having none of it.
Exactly. Now, Lisa Murkowski, we don't know. She has been indicating no's, but there's a lot in the replace bill for Alaska. Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia has been quite strong on no, but President Trump is going to West Virginia today and is giving remarks. And so there will be quite a bit of pressure put on her. On her webpage, she has a statement out now over the weekend that I saw that was pointed out to me by a West Virginia talk show host that is, I think, more conciliatory than some of her remarks last week towards the bill. I don't know if that means anything or not.
Well, they're throwing something like $10 billion at her, aren't they? Saying, here, use this money for your opiate epidemic in West Virginia?
Yeah, they are. But she's also concerned about Medicaid also.
Yeah.
Ohio also is coming under, in their sights. Now,
right, that's Portman.
Exactly, Rob Portman. Now, however, the Ohio governor today, John Kasich, has said that it would be a mistake for the Senate to move ahead and force a one-sided deal that the American people are clearly against.
Yeah, and he's right.
So,
which pains me to say, but John Kasich is right.
That's what he's saying. Now, President Trump today is greeting at the White House what the White House is calling victims of Obamacare, and he's also making a statement on health care.
This is shameless. What else is up?
Also, today, senior White House advisor and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner was up on Capitol Hill, and he denied that he colluded with Russians in the course of President Trump's White House bid. He said in a statement ahead of interviews with congressional committees that he has nothing to hide, and he spoke at a stakeout at the White House after his appearance behind closed doors in the Senate office building. He met with staff on the Senate Intelligence Committee today, and he's meeting with lawmakers on the House Intelligence Committee tomorrow. He said that he did attend the 2016 meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort and the Russian lawyer, but that he arrived late. He didn't hear anything about information on Hillary Clinton, and he thought the meeting was such a waste of time that he emailed his assistant to basically get me out of here.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on with that. President Trump apparently is interested, according to Axios website, is very interested in getting Rudy Giuliani to head the Justice Department, bring him back and get rather than Attorney General Jeff Sessions, because he's so unhappy with Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Well, I think his thought is if Sessions would resign, and he's doing everything he can to humiliate him enough that he will, but I'm not sure that Jeff Sessions can be humiliated enough to behave in a different way. But if he can get Sessions to resign, then he can put Giuliani in. Giuliani doesn't have to recuse himself from the Russia stuff, or even if he should, he will assert that he's not going to. And then Giuliani can fire Mueller and the whole team and say, I'll take this over from here. I'll investigate the Russia stuff. And that's the end of that. And, if that's the path that he's trying to go down, and I'd bet just about anything it is, I think where that path leads to is impeachment.
Interesting.
But I could be wrong. Who knows?
And James Bradley, 60, of Clearwater, Florida, the driver of a broiling tractor trailer found packed with immigrants outside a Walmart in San Antonio, was charged today in the deaths of 10 of his passengers, and he could face the death penalty.
Oh my. Yeah. Was he just a flunky? Did he realize what his cargo was?
Well, he said that he was transporting it from Iowa to Brownsville. He was unaware there were people inside until he parked and got out to urinate. He heard banging and shaking. He was surprised, but he also said he knew that the air conditioning didn't work. He also said he didn't call 911, even though he realized several people were dead.
Oh, my. Yeah, that's not good. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction, a book about extinction. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in our atmosphere, trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000-year history of the human race. We are on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a very different place from the one currently cradling us. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, and agricultural collapse, they're all taking place right now, and it's going to get worse. But now other voices have entered the fray, those of geologists who study the longer-term implications and histories of a planet undergoing rapid global warming. Specifically, they are focused on extinctions. The climate scientists, geologists, and those from related scientific disciplines need to continue talking to each other because at some point we may be able to see the critical moment in which the current climate crosses from the realm of a global destabilizer to a global extinction event. We must wake up. It's hard to imagine life without Earth. We take the vast variety of life on this planet and even our own existence for granted. But numerous times in our planet's history, life as we know it has come close to disappearing entirely. We call these events mass extinctions. And we even teach school children about those times of great death on our planet. For example, we know that long ago, on a much more unstable planet, the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid striking the Earth. This leads many people to believe that as long as we don't see an asteroid hurtling toward the planet, all is well. But this is not rational thinking for several reasons. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs and started a major mass extinction is the only event having to do with outer space that we can trace with any certainty. And new science indicates that the asteroid impact itself wasn't what killed the dinosaurs. It was the global warming that followed it. New science has discovered a common theme in all of the extinctions in the past, and it's woven right into the global fabric of today as yet another mass extinction threatens our planet. That global consistent thread is global warming. We have had 6 extinctions in the billion-year history of life on our planet. Each sharp spike in the chart below indicates one of these mass extinctions. There's a chart on the page. Occurring about 450 million years ago, the Ordovician / Silurian mass extinction devastated marine life, which at the time dominated the planet. In a series of 2 extinctions, 60 and 70% of all life on the planet was taken, respectively. Then, fewer than 100 million years later, the planet was rocked again. The Denovian period was capped off by a 20 million year death march. It killed off 70% of life on Earth. This included many coral reefs, which didn't return for another 100 million years. We know of the KT extinction, the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction, which occurred 65 million years ago, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. There was also an extinction event 200 million years ago, known as the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. But none of these extinctions explains the huge spike shown in the center of the previous chart. That one happened 250 million years ago and was the worst mass extinction of species event in the history of our planet. It was the extinction of all extinctions. Referred to as the Great Dying, the Permian mass extinction took out at least 95% of all life on the planet in fewer than 100,000 years, an instant in geological time. Professor Paul Wignall of the University of Leeds, and an expert on mass extinctions, told me that the Permian was the greatest crisis that life on Earth has ever suffered. Only in the past 2 decades has the cause of the Permian extinction been understood. It was speculated that an asteroid impact may have been the trigger, but more recent research by Professor Wignall, geologists, and other scientists around the world have revealed the true trigger came from deep within the Earth. The Permian mass extinction was initiated by a colossal flow of lava in an area of what is now Siberia. That was the trigger, but not the killer. The killer was under the water and under the ice, where trillions of tons of greenhouse gases, largely derived from carbon, and frozen in the form of crystalline methane, lay in wait. Thus, global warming is the force behind the death of nearly everything on the planet during the Permian mass extinction. That point is well illustrated. You can again see the spikes of mass extinctions measured by the increase in global temperatures, with the largest spike representing the Permian mass extinction. Wignall told me, there have been a lot of disasters and crises in the geological past. It's interesting to study them because they may have a comparison to today. He added, I think it is certainly extremely significant that a lot of the main crises of the past are associated with global warming, with obvious implications for the present day. The 6th mass extinction may even rival the speed and intensity of the Great Permian mass extinction, but the 6th is not represented on either of the 2 previous charts. That's because it's the one happening today, right now, all around us. And then we go on to document how the burning of fossil fuels is throwing an amount of carbon into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that's relatively similar to what happened with that giant volcanic eruption in Siberia 250 million years ago with the Permian mass extinction, and how it could be leading to a major extinction event. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Back on June 30th, about 2 weeks ago, the New York Times published a piece by Kaya Laterman, Laterman, titled Helping Those Who Hoard, Hoard. And it's specific to New York, to apartment owners and managers. And, you know, what do you do? Like, they start out with the story of this one apartment building where they had out of thousands of people, 2,820 apartments. The sprawling, it's called Penn South. It's a huge co-op complex. And there were about 100 people who never let them in to do inspections of their heating and air conditioning systems. And when they did, they discovered that out of those 100 people who always refused to let the inspectors in, half of them did so because they were hoarders. Their apartments were so filled with stuff that you could hardly move through it. And in some cases, it was a fire hazard. In some cases, it was a health and safety hazard, excuse me. And so the question becomes, what do you do with and for people who are compulsive hoarders? Hoarding syndrome is now recognized by the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version. I think they're up to version 4 now, maybe 5. It's 5. Thank you, Troy. V5, the DSM-5. It's got its own category now. It used to be considered a subset of obsessive compulsive disorder, but apparently some people with hoarding syndrome don't have OCD. There's different things that could be triggering it. But principally, it's like a variation on OCD. And so they went out and hired some professionals and said, how do we do this? What do we do with this? What's the best way to proceed? And they talk about, getting adult protective services involved, getting a guardian appointed, basically going around the person. But that's, anyhow, getting adversarial, this is from the article, getting adversarial, however, is not the answer. Jackson Sherratt, a licensed clinical social worker and the director of Project ORE at the Manhattan-based nonprofit Educational Alliance, warns that the more adversarial a board or landlord is in dealing with an individual who has hoarding tendencies, the bigger and more protracted the battle. He has worked on 100 or so hoarding cases on the Lower East Side and in the East Village over the past several years. He said many that required wearing a hazmat suit and a respirator to clean out the apartment. He said you can't be threatening if you want a sustainable result. If you just hire a crew and haul the stuff out, people will just bring it back in from the garbage. So you've got to get them to sign on for this. Now, why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because we have a serious problem in this country called oligarchy. We've got a small group of a few thousand people who have hoarded so much money and have hoarded the power, the political power that comes with that amount of money, and they're investing that power into hoarding more money. This is the group that has engineered the transfer of about $7 trillion of wealth from the American working class to the top 1% just since 2008, maybe as much as $20 trillion in wealth from the American middle class to the 1% since Reagan began the process of making it possible. And so now we've got government right now in the United States run by oligarchs, right? The Republicans control the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the White House. And the Republican Party is controlled by a small group of right-wing billionaires, hoarders. These are people for whom $1 billion isn't enough, $2 billion isn't enough, $5 billion isn't enough. Nope, got to have 10. No, hey, that's not enough. Got to make 20. No, we got to make it 40. No, we got to make it 80. It's like there's just never enough. This is classic hoarding behavior. And so we've got this group of people who, if they had not been born wealthy or had not made great wealth, and in most cases they've been born wealthy, and even when they made great wealth, like Bill Gates, he was born into a way upper middle class family. So he had the advantages of the top education, the best schools, a safety net if he wanted to drop out of school and start Microsoft. He knew that his family could catch him if he fell, all those kind of things. So basically that's the social class that goes on to become vastly, obscenely rich, only they view it as never rich enough. And oh my God, the government wants to raise taxes? I was talking with a friend of mine who lives in Israel over the weekend. We've been friends for decades. We get together on the phone every month or so. And he told me how he was trying to cap his income. I don't want to reveal too many details about who this is. He was trying to, dial back his working hours because he was starting to make so much money that he was hitting the 50% tax bracket and,
why do that? You know, he doesn't need that much money to live. You know, they've got, you know, they've got a national healthcare system. They've got, you know, very, very competent social safety net in Israel. And I was like, well, how much money is that? And he was like, oh, around $40,000 a year. I'm like, whoa. You know, in the United States, if we hit 50% income tax at $40,000 a year, we'd have a very different society. We'd have a very different culture. We'd have a much more egalitarian society. So how do we deal with these people who are mentally ill, who are hoarding cash? Well, in my opinion, the only way to deal with it is through taxation policy. It's how we've historically dealt with it. You make it really, really hard for them to hoard that much money. And, you know, but I would argue that this hoarding behavior is killing us. It's destroying American democracy. Meanwhile, some other news and some little geeky science here. Rex Tillerson, according to The Hill, is thinking about quitting the State Department. Sean Spicer, of course, last week quit the White House's press office, and he's no longer the press secretary. That's now Ms. Huckabee Sanders, and now Scaramucci is the communications director, presumably the boss of that area, and Scaramucci is like, you know, this is a guy who apparently has no core beliefs. He's going through and scrubbing out his Twitter feeds supporting single-payer health care and talking about every scientist understands global warming is real and you know, Donald Trump is a jerk. And I'm not sure that's the word he used, but, you know, where's that effect? You know, all this kind of stuff. So he's deleting all these. So, you know, here's a guy who, like, he just follows power. And presumably wealth. I mean, he's very proud of his role in a hedge fund that handled billions of dollars and all that kind of thing. So I'm not sure how this is going to end. I don't see how it ends well. But on the other hand, Scaramucci is so much like Trump. And he's running essentially the same con that Trump is running, which is I'm on your side. Here's my positions, when, in fact, those aren't his positions. And you know, that it may, you know, with Fox viewers and people who listen to a lot of right-wing hate radio, they're like pre-softened up, preconditioned. Over the weekend, I again watched the movie The Brainwashing of My Dad by Jen Seko. And it's an absolutely brilliant movie. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in it. And she follows her father going from being a really nice guy who starts getting into Rush Limbaugh and Fox News to the point that he's virtually psychotic, hating everybody, screaming at everybody all the time. And then he goes through a health crisis that pulls him out of the ability to listen to Limbaugh every day and watch Fox News every day. And all of a sudden, he becomes a normal human being again. And, you know, all these people telling their stories about their relatives who got sucked into the right-wing hate machine. And it's real. And until that is delegitimized or people wake up to the lies that are being fed to them. I mean, the New York Times right now is asking Fox and Friends to apologize because the president of the United States tweeted a lie about the New York Times that was promoted on Fox and Friends by Fox hosts. And, you know, I mean, Fox, people who watch Fox know less about what's going on in the United States and the world than people who don't watch any media at all. They're not just uninformed, they're malinformed or misinformed. They're lied to constantly, every single day. You want to see the lies, go to foxhounds.us or MediaMatters.org. Every day they post the day's lies from Fox. And it's not just Fox. Right-wing hate radio does the same thing. Finally, I promised a little geeky science, and then we'll pick up your calls. It's Anything Goes Summer here. This is from April Short's piece over on Alternet today. 3 things you probably didn't know about humans' ancient relationship with dogs. Turns out we didn't domesticate dogs. You know, the story was that humans started using dogs to hunt with. Well, no. I mean, now they're doing this really, really careful DNA analysis, and they're figuring this stuff out. No, we didn't use dogs to hunt. Dogs used us. We didn't domesticate wolves. Wolves domesticated us. We actually changed our dietary habits because wolves started living with us. We used to eat a lot more vegetables. We actually, and they identified the genes. And they identified one particular gene, this genetic mutation that made some wolves want to cuddle with us. And the genes are the GTF2I, the GTF2IRD1, and the WBSCR17. These 3 genes are all mutated in dogs. Now, when you mutate these 3 genes in humans, you get something called the Williams-Burren syndrome, Williams-Burron syndrome makes people hyper-gregarious. They walk up to total strangers and tell them their whole life story. They are so friendly. They love everybody. And that's a dog, right? I mean, over the weekend, I was playing with Blue. He's, our dog. We've got this Australian Shepherd. And, I throw the ball to the other end of the boat, and he falls all over himself, chasing it and bringing it back and dropping it. And I'll establish eye contact with him, and he'll hold eye contact with me for minutes. I mean, just absolutely right there. That's something that comes from these 3 genes being mutated. And you see this in people who have this syndrome. And so that was the beginning of that. And then those dogs got super friendly with us, and they domesticated us. It's fascinating. It's just the whole thing is just fascinating. You want all the details. April Short wrote the piece. It's over at alternate.org right now. So we've got that. We've got the Democratic Party trying to reboot itself. We've got the Republican Party trying to lie to us once more about how they really want to make sure that everybody in America has access to health care. But we're going to do it by throwing 32 million people off health insurance. Brilliant. And, of course, Jared Kushner today denying that he ever did anything with anybody.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
At least anything with anybody that he shouldn't have done it with, because he's just been upright and appropriate his entire life ever since his dad went to prison. And welcome back. In Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas, Reza is watching us on Free Speech TV. Am I saying your name right, Reza?
Yes, Reza is very correct.
Reza, hey, what's up?
I just was listening to you earlier concerning the segment on conservative reaching the rural America through Fox and the conservative radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that Democrats spend $750 million just a couple of months of election time.
Right.
And that money goes to waste because conservatives have brainwashed people for 2 years prior to the election.
I agree.
And my suggestion is Democrats are spending 700 so many millions of dollars in 2 months, spreading during 2 years, and put little segments on local cables and local radio station, which is cheaper, and reaching those people with short segments. That Free Speech TV have a bunch of those good little liberal or what's the word, progressive talking point or segments. I think that worked better in the long run.
I agree. I agree, but nobody in the Democratic Party wants to listen to me about that.
And one more, just in a light segment, when they say Republican health care should be Republican who cares about health care.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure there are any, but other than possibly Susan Collins. But we'll see. We'll see, Reza. Thanks a lot for the call. Well said. Chuck in Riverside, California, watch us on YouTube. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking the call.
Chuck, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you speak up?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. First off, I hate the new Democratic slogan. I think it's really goofy. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the Papa John's slogan: better ingredients, better pizza. It doesn't seem to have any substance to me. I don't know where they got that from. But my question is, I was watching this documentary on Netflix called The Untold History of the United States. And when it got to the Obama administration, it said that one of his, I believe it was his chief of staff, told him that any Democratic president who denies advice from the Army, from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will instantly get ousted because you just can't do that as a Democratic president. And I was wondering how.
That's not true.
Can we have a Democratic president?
Chuck, that's not true. And B, President Obama backed down his Joint Chiefs on multiple occasions. They wanted to go into Syria. He said no. They wanted a much more aggressive action in Libya. He said no. They wanted to expand the war in Iraq. He said no. They wanted to expand the war in Afghanistan, and he said no.
Now, Trump has just said, yeah, you guys do whatever you damn well please. And so all of a sudden, we've got soldiers dying in Afghanistan and Iraq again. And now, which kind of, it was Turkey. I guess the Turkish news agency has, released the locations of American troops in Syria, putting them at risk of death. But presidents, Democratic and Republican, have pushed back against the Joint Chiefs forever. So, Chuck, I would be skeptical of that documentary. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching, Senator. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Noel in Riverside, California. Hey, Noel, what's on your mind today?
Okay. You just made that comment about President Obama. Well, they really made it hard on him, though, when he stood up against him. If you notice, they just made it a point to run him down. And by the way, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but his mother is Jewish. So basically, that's like 3 strikes against him. He's really actually a Jew since his mother was Jewish. So Democratic, Black, and Jewish. So.
Are you sure? I thought his parents, I thought her parents were like Presbyterian or something.
No, she's Jewish.
Well, okay, let's
anyway, also
hold that until it's fact checked.
A miracle that I opened my door this morning to get the mail, and it was raining here in California in July, and they're, whoa, am I in Twilight Zone? It was just pouring. It's really unreal. Okay, I think the talking points for the Democrats, they need to stop beating around the bush and get to the hardcore points. Number one, do you really want your loved one to lose health care? And number two, on the back burner is Social Security. You let these people keep going, and they're going to be after Social Security. And who wants to lose Social Security? Right. And just really quick on Israel, while I agree this law is radical, it's history that when Israel first came into being, that that the UN had they wanted to make this resolution where they had it 3 ways, where the Arabs would have their place, the Jews would have their place, and then any other international people would have their place. And the Arabs fought against that. And to this day, the Palestinians do not consider the Israel nation. They know they're there, but they don't consider they have a right to be there. Right. And any Bible scholar, in all truth and honesty, you can go back to Genesis. God has ordained the Jews to be in Israel, plus other people in peace. He's not saying only Jews can be there, but it is a Jewish state. And there's just no getting around that. Anybody can do any kind of research they want. And I'm not saying they're 100% right all the time.
Noel, do you really think that the governments of the world, that the United Nations, should be making laws based on the Old Testament? Then it comes along, we've got to get the Upanishads in here, and what about the Quran and what about the sayings of Buddha? Our policies should be made based on what comports with our values, not what was written 3,000 years ago in some old book.
Well, the Jews, God is real. It's not just an old book. He's real.
To you, but I guarantee you that somebody who is not Christian or Jewish would say, no, that's just an old book. My book, the Book of Mormon is the book, or the book of, although they would acknowledge the Bible, but anyhow, I've said what I have to say. Noel, thanks for the call. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's up?
Yes, hi, Tom. I was listening to Chuck Schumer this morning, and he was talking about the New Deal. Well, he mentioned the very things that pretty much was being said before, except this time he left out Social Security, left out Medicare, and what they should do is really pretty much what you were saying earlier. They should stick to the things that affect all of us. Forget this stuff about the gay rights with the transvestites, with the Hispanics. They should stick to the things that affect all of us. And when we have the right House and Senate to work with, then we can address those issues. We have to stay together on the issues that stay.
Well, I think they're clearly going in that direction. This is, Chuck Schumer's comments were, the reason we've been losing elections is because we've been failing to offer a compelling economic narrative. And the subtext of that is that the social narrative has subsumed it, has overwhelmed it. And, I get the practical politic of it. My concern is that if you're going to go with a pure economic narrative, then you need to go with the logical extreme of your economic narrative and be ready to back up a little bit and compromise, which is how Republicans have been doing it all along. Just end Social Security. Okay, well, we'll cut it a little bit. Democrats need to be doing the same thing only on the other side. Thank you, Don.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And don't give up the culture wars. Don't stop defending the rights of minorities at all. But put those wars secondary to the economic.
With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neurolinguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD, but it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children. One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored. Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste.
The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a three-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes for me black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmannReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Patrick in Long Island City, New York. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
How you doing today, Tom? Thanks for having me on.
I'm great.
What I was catching the last few calls, it sounds like you got a lot of Fox watchers, I think. I'm not too sure.
I don't know. By the way, newshoundsus.us is the website for the group that watches Fox, so you don't have to. I gave the wrong name for them earlier. And,
okay, thank you.
Oh, and there's one other thing. Somebody called earlier and said, President Obama's mother was Jewish, so he's Jewish. No, President Obama's mother was Christian.
Yes.
And his father, he married, after he divorced Obama's mother, he remarried, and the woman that he remarried was Jewish. But that's got nothing to do with Obama. And, I don't know how this stuff just like,
that's kind of what I wanted to get at. I heard before the woman, I think it was a woman, said that the better deal sounded like something from the pizza chain.
Yeah.
And I've heard this. This is the second or third time I heard this over the weekend on the Sunday shows. And I'm really wondering, it's nice to see the Democrats come out and, be aggressive with this better deal. But I'm wondering how long it's going to take before this is laughed at and ridiculed like Obamacare as opposed to the ACA.
Well, it depends on what they do with it. I'm a big believer in branding, that you can take pretty much anything and attach meaning to it over time if you do it right.
Would you say that it's important then for the Democrats to definitely get out there and attach their meaning to it?
Well, that's my point. I mean, who would have known? If 30 years ago you had said someday the richest company in America is going to be called Apple. And they go, Apple, what the hell is that? They sell fruit? And you say, one of the biggest companies in the world is going to be called Google. Well, what's Google? It's the name of a number, 1,000, with 1,000 zeros.
I'm younger than you, but I remember the political uproar over when Michael Dukakis gave the death penalty to a woman who had raped his wife.
Right. But that was a gotcha question that really got turned around on him, and Dukakis handled it very, very badly. But the point I was making is I'm a big believer in branding. I think that what the slogan is, yes, it's important to have a good slogan, but it doesn't have to be the perfect slogan because you're going to attach meaning to it over time. The question is, what is the meaning that you're attaching to it? So if our new slogan, if the Democratic Party's new slogan is going to be a better deal, fine. Let's define what that better deal is. And what I've seen so far seems sort of, kind of half and half, kind of wishy-washy. And I would like the Democratic Party to be very assertive and say, these are the things that we absolutely believe in, that we believe in freedom, and you are not free if you are hungry. We believe in freedom, and you are not free if you are sick and you have no way to get well. You are not free. We believe in freedom, and you are not free if you don't have housing. We believe in freedom, and you're not free if you can't find a job, no matter how hard you want to work. And so we are going to solve that problem by producing a system of national health care, by taking care of the housing crisis that we have in the United States. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that, including changing our tax laws with regard to mortgage deductions and whatnot. We're going to take care of the health care problem with single-payer health care. We're going to take care of the environmental problem with a carbon tax. I mean, just very straightforward stuff, and try to tie it all back to a principal meme. In my mind, it should be freedom or liberty, because that markets so well for the Republicans. The Democrats should steal it, frankly. But
I would almost suggest that the Democrats take a look at Teddy Roosevelt's speech of, what was it, 1901, 1902 or something?
Which one?
You play it often at times.
Oh, yeah, that was actually from 1912. That was when he was running on the Bull Moose Party. And, and he talks about a living wage. That was when Teddy Roosevelt invented the phrase a living wage. And he talked about living wage will vary from parts of the country depending on, where you live. But it has certain basic elements, enough that you can have a reasonable standard of living, that you don't have to steal for food, essentially, that you can raise your children and put them through school, that you can take vacations, that you have health care that you can provide for your family in sickness and health, and so that you can have a reasonable retirement, a reasonable amount set aside for retirement and old age. In fact, here is the clip. This is Theodore Roosevelt, 1912, recorded by Thomas Edison himself. Here's the clip of Teddy Roosevelt saying this.
Okay.
We stand for a living wage. Wages are subnormal if they fail to provide a living for those who devote their time and energy to industrial occupation. The monetary equivalent of a living wage varies according to local conditions, but must include enough to secure the elements of a normal standard of living. A standard high enough to make morality possible, to provide for education and recreation, to care for immature members of the family, to maintain the family during periods of sickness, and to permit a reasonable saving for old age.
There you go. And that was 103 years ago.
I say let's dust
113 years ago. I'm sorry?
Let's dust it off and use it again.
Yeah, except that Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican.
That's right. That's right.
So if you're going to do something like that, I would go to Franklin Roosevelt's his second Bill of Rights speech, where he said, he laid out this happened, in the year before he died, and he never saw it come to fruition. But I would go to FDR's second Bill of Rights speech I'd do right past the four freedoms and right to the second Bill of Rights and say, this is what we believe in. This is what we stand on. But it's essentially the same thing. You have the right to an education. You have the right to health care. You have the right to housing. You have the right to a job. And if the marketplace doesn't provide for those things, government will. Very, very straightforward. Patrick, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Tom.
Hey,
I've
Corky.
been watching that 4-part series on the Revolutionary War.
Where is that?
Huh?
Where is that?
It was on TV. It was a special 4-part series.
Yeah.
And the average farmers, they fought in snow-covered lands with just rags on their feet. And they were the ordinary people, the farmers, and the townspeople.
Right.
And they fought to the death. And yet, they weren't given any special treatment. Like today, the average guy is concomitant to the big money corporations, and they're the ones that keep them free, so they're free to operate their businesses, and they don't pay it. They don't want to pay us.
Sure. And the reason they don't want to pay us is because when Reagan dropped the top tax rate on super rich people, the super rich people who own all these big corporations started taking all the money. And in fact, somebody on Twitter, I had said, $7 trillion since 2008, and they said, oh no, it's been like $30 trillion since the 80s that has been taken from the middle class, the working class, and given to the top 1%. And it's, it's a number that I would not argue with. So yeah, I'm with you. The Republicans are betraying the spirit of 1776, spirit of 76, a phrase that Thomas Jefferson actually invented. Corky, thank you. Well said. Herbert in Bayside, New York. Hey, Herbert, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Tom, just a statement. I wonder where the Democrats are. The Republicans have failed at least 3 major times with their health plan. Why aren't the Democrats there with an immediate plan to say this is how we're going to fix Obamacare? Right. Where are they? What are they doing?
The problem is that there is not a consensus in the Democratic Party about how to fix it. You've got the more middle of the road factions who think that Obamacare is just fine. Let's just restore the risk corridors that Marco Rubio took out and make the appropriate payments, and because every blue state, Obamacare is working just fine. Obamacare is only failing in the red states, and it's only and not all the red states for that matter. It's only failing in the red states that have taken the waiver so that they're allowing insurance companies to offer subprime programs. So Obamacare itself, the companies selling on the exchange, end up with the sickest people, number one. And number two, who fail to expand Medicaid. So the hospitals, their rural hospitals in particular, are failing. And that's it. And so you've got this group of Democrats who are like, hey, Obamacare would work just fine if it was implemented the way that we wrote the law. Let's just do that. And then you've got another group of Democrats who are saying, no, it should be single payer. And we need to go single payer. We need to just, throw everything into single payer and just go for broke on it. And broke might be fixing Obamacare. That's our fallback position. And, I'm with that second group, but I understand what the first group is saying. And, it's a step. It's a step in the right direction. But the problem that that Schumer and Pelosi and all the people in the Democratic Party who come up with strategy and Tom Perez, the problem that these guys have is that there's not a consensus across the party. And when the Republicans were looking at situations at positions where there was not a consensus, they just went ahead anyway and started basically supporting the people who supported what they were doing and didn't the ones who weren't. Now, granted, that was being driven by a bunch of hoarding billionaires, but that's what they did.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And it ultimately conferred to them control over the Supreme Court, the White House, the Senate, the House of Representatives, and 33 or 34 state capitals. Welcome back. John, watching Free Speech TV in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. Maybe the Democrats should consider one thing. They are talking about a better deal. Well, maybe they should add the People's Party with a better deal and have like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Keith Ellison. There's also a Congresswoman, I think her name's Gabby. I'm not sure of her last name, but she's, I really like her too. They're all progressives, and I think they should just come out and really rename the Democratic Party the People's Party. That will get national attention.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, this is not happening at the level of the party because of the diversity within the party, which is arguably a good thing. But at least something's happening. I'm very pleased to see them moving forward and saying, we blew it. We weren't solid enough, and we're going to do it this time. But I get what you're saying.
Thing, Tom, I'd like to add, though, I think the Democrats should also take a pledge, all of them, about not taking corporate money. And I think that also would get national attention if they did that.
I agree. Although there are, again, a number of people in the party who consider that to be a suicide move, and in many parts of the country, it may well be a suicide move. So it's a tough one. John, thank you for the call. I share your concerns, though, and I apparently share your opinions. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Professor, listen. In my humble opinion, I believe that the Democratic Party is paid to lose. Now, everybody get their pencil and paper out. I need you to take down a name. His name is Anthony Rendon. Rendon. He is the Democratic Assemblyman in California. Now, this guy took $700,000 from Big Pharma not to bring the health care bill before the Assembly. We've got the California Nurses Association all up and down for this. But this man took that. So you don't have to be a Republican, you see.
No, he's the Speaker of the State Assembly. He's the top Democrat in the lower chamber, is he not?
Now you preach it. Now here's what you got to do. Call that man. You don't have to be in his. Just call him up and say, hey, listen, I'd appreciate it if you allow the legislation to come before the powers to be. Okay? It's very important that happens. Now, don't be watching Washington. That's theater. This move, play chess. Play chess. This move in California is big because California represents about 6% of the healthcare business. Now, what we're talking about here, folks, is a redistribution of the wealth. If you get a universal healthcare program, that means that $600 billion a year comes down to us, the people down here. And if you're talking about universal health care, now you can go down to the homeless people and say, hey, I got something for you. But if you ain't talking like that, this New Deal, give me a break. You're hoping that the better deal is that the Republicans are going to fall down on their face with all the power they have now with gerrymandering, et cetera. That's not going to happen. I'll give you an example. In Los Angeles, we got a guy named Gil Garcetti. He's got 80% of the vote. Yes, he did, of the people that voted. But only 11% of the people voted, which means that 89% of the people stayed away. I don't consider that a legitimate administration. So anyway, just to keep the stuff clean, I can talk about a lot of different things. Anthony Rendon, call that man. And Professor, I don't have the information. I know your staff is powerful. Give them the number. Call that man and tell him, please allow that legislation to come before the powers to be. And thank you.
How's this being? You live in California, Morris.
Yes, I do.
Is Rendon getting trashed in the media there?
Of course not. Corporate media is supporting what he's doing. You're talking big pharma. They're a family, una familia, man.
Yeah, got it. Okay, Morris, thanks a lot for the call. I'll see what I can do in tracking down his contact information. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. John in Edgerton, Wisconsin. Hey, John, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
I've got a question on if Obamacare was put in and implemented correctly, and then you had Medicare for all. In Wisconsin, we didn't have the Medicaid expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So how many more people would have been covered, and now they would have lost it? Wouldn't it have been like 100 million instead of 32 million? You know what I'm saying? If it would have been implemented correctly and Medicaid.
If the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court had not intervened and changed the law so that states had the option to opt out of Medicaid expansion, then pretty much all of America would be covered by Obamacare. I think the estimate was somewhere between 3% and 9%, best case, worst case, might not be covered, and it would be largely because they're people who make enough money that they're not eligible for Medicaid. And they're young and healthy enough that they have no interest in buying health insurance, and they're willing to simply pay the fine. But it would be a very small percentage of America.
Yeah, but a lot of them would lose it right now if they got rid of Obamacare if it would have been implemented correctly.
Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
You're absolutely right.
I mean, you're talking hundreds of millions of people, not just 32.
Well, yeah, tens of millions of people anyway. Yeah,
all the red states. I mean, I know in Wisconsin, there's a lot of people that would have health insurance right now that can't even afford it.
Right. Had Scott Walker expanded Medicaid, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
and that's...
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, John. Excellent point. TC in Ozark, Arkansas. Hey, TC, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for your time. Two quick side notes on your hoarders of cash story.
Mm-hmm.
You know what they say about the love of money.
Yes.
And about the concerned elderly lady in Oregon. She could probably throw Fukushima into that mix.
Yep.
But I was calling about the crumbling infrastructure, our roads, interstate, farm and county roads, the bridges. They're filled with consumers and employees. You have people who are driving to work to sell a product. You have people who are delivering a product. And you have people out there who are out to purchase a product. And all the time they're burning a product. So you would think the corporations would be bending over backwards and go above and beyond to ensure our infrastructure was top-notch.
You would think.
You would think.
Yeah. But they're generally not. I mean, corporations are not focused on the public good. They're not even focused on what's the best thing for the economy overall. They're just focused on what's going to jack profits up over the next quarter the most, so that we can all get our bonus checks and our stockholders get their dividends. And
and that's the heart of the problem. And there it is. Goes back to your hoarders of cash and what's at the root of the problem.
And this all goes back to changes made during the Reagan administration in corporate governance. Prior to Reagan, the CEO of a corporation had to answer to his employees or her employees. They had to answer to their customers. They had to answer to the community in which the organization was existing. They had to answer to the institution of the corporation itself. And many of them had spent 20, 30, 40 years in that corporation, working their way up from the bottom. And they had to answer to their stockholders. And Reagan changed it so that the only constituency to whom they have to answer is their stockholders. That's it. And so they can tear the institution apart, break it up, sell it off. They can screw the employees. They can sell crap to the customers, and they can ruin the local community. Carrier now is sending another 300 jobs to Mexico, and that's the exact same factory where Donald Trump said he was going to save the jobs. They don't care. They've got to satisfy the bottom line. They've got to satisfy their stockholders.
And again, we're back to the heart of the problem.
Yeah.
That's the profits over people, and that's the love of money.
Yep. Amen. And that can be restrained by government action, and it was prior to Reagan letting that beast out. TC, thanks. Very well said. Dan in Villa Park, Illinois. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Your earlier caller was talking about those patriots that got us our country by fighting the English. But one of the things that came out in a book I read called His Excellency about George Washington, and it's a short, breezy book, and it's really wonderful. Bottom line is they promised full pensions and half pensions to the enlisted men and full pensions to the officers. And after the war, they said, we just can't pay them. And so when people talk about not taking care of veterans, this has been going on since the inception of this country. And the only administration that took care of the fighting man was whom? And
Harry Truman.
FDR and Truman.
Yeah.
And once again, Democrats, people say, well, what have Democrats been doing? And this kind of feeds into this. I like the fact that it's a better deal, feeds back into the New Deal and the Square Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, here's the deal. People don't understand their history because they don't want us to by, taking the textbooks down in Texas and creating what they create. The bottom line is we can have these things. Zinn is right, but we have to keep pushing forward because the money interests will always push back.
Yep.
And everything that you do, and Stephanie in her own way, and Rachel Maddow in her own way, and Joy Reid in her own way, and Lawrence O'Donnell, and even Chris Matthews, these are the things that will continue to move us forward. People who say voting doesn't matter fall into the pitfall of letting the smallest group decide for the biggest group.
Yep.
And when we do that, we lose. I haven't been working at what I do for a decent wage since 2009. I take what I can get.
Yeah.
And my family is poorer for it. But we're doing the best we can in light of the fact that, there is a class warfare, and that side won.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're continuing to win. You're quoting Warren Buffett famously said, class war in America? Yes, of course there's class war in America, and my class is winning.
And the bottom line is they take and take and take, and when they say both sides do it, that's them talking. That's a disenfranchisement. I debated in high school in 1972, and that was out there, disenfranchisement of voters. is not illegal, but it's darned effective.
Yeah.
Because you can just get people to not care, and if they don't care, guess who gets to decide? We don't want goo-goo government, goo-goo Republicans. We want the people who want what we want.
Right.
You have a great day, Tom. Keep doing what you're doing and speaking truth to power, man. We thank you.
I'll do my very best, Dan. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to WCPT. And on that note, I will say we have to carry this thing forward. The Democratic Party it's not God, right? The Democratic Party responds to you. The Democratic Party responds to its members. Unlike the Republican Party, which only responds to the billionaires who own it, the Democratic Party actually responds to its voters. So, and is wide open. If you want to walk in and become part of it, if you want to become a precinct committee person, if you want to run for political office, the Democratic Party, by and large, I will give you, there's probably a few exceptions in a few places in the United States, but by and large, the Democratic Party is wide open and waiting for you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.